Hey Dead Signal FM viewers, getting ready for bed? Wishing you a calm and cozy night. Before we start, where are you watching from and what time is it? Let's get started. The Forgotten Highway. The headlights of Martin Caldwell's rusted Chevy cut through the fog like dull knives. The small cone of visibility they provided was barely enough for him to keep the car on the twisting back road. This was a shortcut, supposedly, though he didn't remember the route being so narrow or so damn long. The clock on his dashboard read 2:17 a.m. Its red numbers the only source of warmth in the chill that had settled into the car despite the heater working overtime. Martin rolled his shoulders, fighting the fatigue that threatened to overcome him. 12 hours on the road was taking its toll. He hadn't planned on driving through the night, but the funeral had run long. And then there was the awkward dinner with his estranged siblings, their faces drawn with grief but also suspicion. Where were you when Dad needed you? Their eyes had asked the question their mouths wouldn't form. Nowhere good, he muttered to himself, his voice sounding hollow in the empty car. He'd left Portland 18 hours ago, heading back to his apartment in Boston, to a job he hated and a life that felt increasingly like someone else's. His father's death had left him with nothing but regrets and a small box of personal effects he'd tossed in the trunk. He hadn't seen the old man in 6 years. Cancer had eaten away at him slowly, then all at once, according to his sister Ellen. The road ahead narrowed further, the shoulder dropping away to reveal a steep embankment. His GPS had stopped working about 30 minutes ago, the screen frozen on a road that didn't match the one he was traveling. The map app on his phone showed him in the middle of nowhere, a blue dot swimming in a sea of green. No roads, no towns, just wilderness. Martin squinted as a sign emerged from the fog. The reflective surface was pitted with age and what looked like bullet holes, but he could make out, "Welcome to Millhaven, Copy 1216. The paint was faded and peeling, and someone had spray-painted a large X across the population count. Millhaven. The name stirred something in his memory, but he couldn't place it. He was sure he'd never been here before. This part of Maine was unfamiliar territory, a patchwork of small towns and dense forests that seemed designed to swallow travelers whole. As he passed the sign, the radio, which had been playing only static for the last hour, suddenly crackled to life. A woman's voice emerged from the speakers, her tone flat and distant. Returning to Millhaven. All residents are advised to secure their homes and remain indoors until morning. This is not a drill. Repeat. All residents are advised to secure. The voice cut out abruptly, replaced by the opening notes of "Don't Fear the Reaper." Martin felt a chill run up his spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. He jabbed at the radio's power button, and the music died. The silence that followed seemed heavier than before. The road widened slightly as he approached what appeared to be the town's main street. A few streetlights cast sickly yellow pools on the empty sidewalks. Most of the storefronts were dark, save for a gas station on the corner with a flickering sign that read, "Last Chance Gas." Martin glanced at his fuel gauge. The needle hovered just above empty. He'd meant to fill up earlier, but had been too eager to get back on the road after a quick bathroom break at a rest stop that smelled of antiseptic and despair. He pulled into the gas station, the tires crunching over what looked like broken glass. The place appeared open. Lights were on inside the small convenience store, but there was no sign of life. Still, the pumps were illuminated, and when he got out of the car, he was relieved to find they accepted credit cards. The cold air hit him like a physical blow, making his eyes water. He fumbled with the pump, his fingers stiff, his breath forming clouds in front of his face. As he waited for the tank to fill, he looked around, taking in the empty streets and the distant silhouettes of buildings. Despite the late hour, he had the unsettling feeling that he was being watched. A sound drew his attention to the convenience store. A thump, as if something heavy had fallen. Through the windows, he could see fluorescent lights buzzing over aisles of snacks and coolers of drinks, but no clerk behind the counter. The pump clicked off. Martin replaced the nozzle and secured his gas cap, then hesitated. He should probably let someone know he'd filled up, maybe grab some coffee for the road. He approached the store cautiously. A bell jingled overhead as he pushed open the door. The interior was warmer than outside, but still uncomfortably cool. "Hello?" he called out. "Anyone working tonight?" No response. He moved further into the store, past shelves of beef jerky and candy bars. A magazine rack near the counter displayed publications with dates from 3 months ago. A small television mounted in the corner was tuned to static. "Hello?" he called again, louder this time. A rustling sound came from behind the counter. Martin leaned over to look, half expecting to find the clerk picking something up off the floor. Instead, he saw a trail of dark liquid seeping out from behind the counter. His heart began to pound. "Hey, are you okay back there?" Still no answer. Martin came around the counter slowly, his mind racing through possibilities. Someone had fallen, had a seizure, needed help. But when he saw what was on the floor, he stumbled backward, knocking over a display of lighters. The man on the floor was clearly dead. His throat had been torn open, the wound jagged and brutal. Blood pooled around him, soaking into his white uniform shirt. His eyes were open, staring at nothing, and his mouth was frozen in what looked like a scream. Martin's first coherent thought was to call 911, but when he pulled out his phone, the screen showed no service. He backed away from the corpse, his eyes darting around the store. Nothing else seemed disturbed. The cash register was closed. It didn't look like a robbery. He needed to get out to find help or at least get far away from here. He turned to leave and froze. A figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the dim light from outside. It was human-shaped but wrong somehow, too tall, too thin, its proportions slightly off. It stood perfectly still, watching him. Martin's mouth went dry. I just found him like this," he stammered. "I was just getting gas." The figure didn't respond. It tilted its head, a movement that was unnaturally fluid, like a puppet being manipulated by invisible strings. Martin edged toward the side exit, never taking his eyes off the silhouette. "I'm going to go find help," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. The figure took a step forward, and the fluorescent lights illuminated its features. It was a woman, or had been once. Her skin was gray and taut over sharp cheekbones. Her eyes were black from lid to lid, and her mouth stretched too wide across her face, revealing teeth that were pointed and yellowed. Martin ran. He slammed through the side exit and sprinted back to his car, the keys already in his hand. Behind him, he heard the bell above the door jingle again. He threw himself into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and jammed the key into the ignition. The engine turned over once, twice, and then roared to life. He floored it, tires squealing as he pulled out of the gas station and back onto the main street. In his rearview mirror, he saw the woman standing in the middle of the road, watching his retreat. She didn't run after him. She didn't need to. Martin drove with shaking hands, his mind replaying what he'd seen. The dead clerk, the woman with the wrong eyes and the wrong mouth, the empty town with its warning broadcast. None of it made sense, but his body understood the danger even if his mind couldn't process it. He needed to find a way out of Millhaven, back to the highway, back to the world that made sense. But as he drove through the dark streets, he began to suspect that he was going in circles. The same boarded-up diner, the same abandoned playground with its rusted swing set, the same Victorian house with its peeling paint and dark windows. And then he saw the sign again, "Welcome to Millhaven, Popey 1216. But this time he was driving into town, not out of it. "No, no, no," he muttered, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. He'd been driving away from town. He was sure of it. But here he was, passing the same bullet-riddled sign. He slammed on the brakes and pulled over, his heart hammering in his chest. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely put the car in park. He needed to think, to figure out what was happening. The radio crackled to life again, unprompted. "Advise all travelers to seek shelter immediately. Do not attempt to leave Millhaven after dark. Repeat, do not attempt to leave Millhaven after dark. The boundary is active, and passage is not possible until dawn." The voice was the same as before, female monotone, with an underlying tension that made Martin's skin crawl. "What boundary?" he said aloud. "What the hell is going on?" As if in answer, his headlights swept across a figure standing in the road ahead. It was the woman from the gas station, her too wide mouth stretched in what might have been a smile. Behind her, others emerged from the mist, men, women, children, all with the same gray skin and black eyes. They moved with an unnatural synchronicity, spreading out across the road, blocking his path. Martin threw the car into reverse, the tires spinning on the wet pavement. He turned the wheel sharply, executing a clumsy three-point turn, and accelerated in the opposite direction. His headlights swept over more figures emerging from side streets and alleyways, their movements jerky and wrong. He sped through the town, taking random turns, trying to find a way out. But each time he thought he was heading away from Millhaven, he would see familiar landmarks. The gas station, the diner, the playground, and always, in his rearview mirror, the gray figures followed, never running but somehow keeping pace. The car's engine began to sputter. Martin glanced at the fuel gauge, watching in disbelief as the needle dropped rapidly toward empty. He'd just filled the tank. It wasn't possible. But the car was slowing, the engine gasping for fuel that wasn't there. He coasted to the side of the road, just as the engine died completely. Martin sat in the silent car, watching the gray figures approach in his rearview mirror. They weren't hurrying. They had all night. He remembered the radio announcement. The boundary is active, and passage is not possible until dawn. Dawn was hours away. He needed to find shelter, somewhere to hide until morning. Somewhere these things couldn't get to him. Martin grabbed his phone and the small flashlight he kept in the glove compartment, then locked the car doors and sat still, thinking. The figures were getting closer, moving with that same unsettling coordination. To his right was a row of small houses, most of them dark and seemingly abandoned. But one, set back from the street, had a porch light on. It was a Victorian-style home, its white paint gray in the darkness, its windows like vacant eyes. It was a risk, but it was better than staying in the car. Martin took a deep breath, unlocked the door, and ran. He felt rather than saw the figures change direction, converging on him as he sprinted across the wet lawn toward the house with the porch light. His lungs burned, and the flashlight beam bounced wildly as he ran. The porch steps creaked under his weight as he bounded up them and reached for the door handle. Locked. He pounded on the door. "Please, let me in. They're coming." The door swung open, and Martin stumbled inside, nearly falling. An elderly woman stood in the entryway, her hand on the doorknob, her expression one of resigned fear. "Quickly," she said, her voice raspy, "before they see." Martin turned to look back through the doorway. The gray figures had stopped at the edge of the property, forming a loose semicircle. They stared at the house, their black eyes reflecting the porch light. The old woman closed the door and engaged several locks. A deadbolt, a chain, and what looked like a custom-made iron bar that slid into brackets on either side of the door frame. "Salt," she said, pointing to a container on a nearby table. "Line the windows and doors. All of them." Martin was too scared to question her. He grabbed the container, a large mason jar filled with what looked like ordinary table salt, and began to do as she instructed, laying down thin white lines along each windowsill and doorway. As he worked, he could hear the old woman moving around the house, checking locks and muttering to herself. The house was cluttered but clean, filled with antique furniture and shelves of books. The walls were lined with framed photographs, most of them yellowed with age. When he was done, he found the woman in the kitchen, heating water in a kettle on an old gas stove. She gestured for him to sit at the small table in the center of the room. "You're not from here," she said. It wasn't a question. Martin shook his head. "I was just passing through. I stopped for gas and found." He trailed off, the image of the dead clerk flashing in his mind. "Poor Tommy," the woman said, sighing. "He should have known better than to work the night shift. But his wife's expecting, and they need the money." She poured hot water into 2 mugs, adding tea bags to each. "I'm Margaret Holloway, by the way. Most folks call me Mags." "Martin Caldwell," he replied automatically. What are those things out there? Mags placed a mug in front of him. The tea smelled strongly of herbs and something else, something bitter. Drink, she said. It will help keep your head clear. Martin took a cautious sip. The tea was oddly sweet but left a metallic aftertaste. They're the people of Millhaven, Mags said, settling into a chair across from him. Or what's left of them, the ones who didn't get out in time. I don't understand. Mags studied him, her eyes, a faded blue, roomy with age, narrowing. No, I don't suppose you would. It's not something outsiders know about. Not something we talk about even among ourselves. She took a long drink of her tea. How much do you know about this town, Mr. Caldwell? Nothing, Martin said. I've never even heard of Millhaven before tonight. Are you sure about that? Mags pressed. Think carefully. The name never came up in your family? No stories? No warnings? Martin started to shake his head, then stopped. There was something, a memory hazy and distant. His father, drunk one Christmas Eve, talking about a town he'd passed through as a young man. A place where night fell too quickly and lasted too long. A place where the people weren't quite right. My father, he said slowly. He mentioned a town once. Said he got lost on his way to Portland. Ended up somewhere he shouldn't have been. He never said the name, but he was scared. I'd never seen him scared before. Mags nodded. Millhaven has been here a long time, Mr. Caldwell. Longer than the maps show. It wasn't always like this, though. Once it was just a normal town. Small, quiet, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone else's business. She paused, her gaze distant. Then the highway came. The highway, Interstate 95. When they built it, they bypassed Millhaven completely. Cut us off. Businesses dried up. People left. Those who stayed changed. Martin frowned. Changed how? Mags gestured toward the window, where shadows moved across the drawn blinds. They started to forget themselves, their humanity. It happened slowly at first. Mood swings, violent outbursts, then physical changes. Eyes turning black, skin going gray. And the hunger. She shuddered. The hunger never stops. But what caused it? Martin asked. A virus? Some kind of contamination? Mags laughed, a bitter sound. Nothing so simple, nothing so explainable. She leaned forward. When a place is forgotten, Mr. Caldwell, it starts to fade. Not just from memory, but from reality itself. And the people who live there, they fade too. They become something else. Something in between. Martin wanted to dismiss her words as the ramblings of a scared old woman. But after what he'd seen, he couldn't. But you're still... You haven't changed. No, Mags agreed. Some of us found ways to hold on, to remember who we are. It's not easy, and it doesn't always work. She nodded toward the salt lines he'd laid down. Salt grounds us, keeps us connected to the earth, to what's real. There are other things too, iron, running water, certain herbs. They help. How long has this been going on? Decades, Mags said. Since the 80s, when the highway was completed. It gets worse every year. More people change. Fewer remember. She took another sip of her tea. And now only a handful of us are left. True humans, Martin felt a tightness in his chest. So those things out there, they were people once? Regular people who just... What? Got forgotten. It's more complicated than that, Mags said. But essentially, yes, they're the forgotten ones. And they're angry about it. That announcement on the radio, about the boundary, what does that mean? Martin asked. Millhaven isn't fully in this world anymore, Mags explained. It's slipping into something else. Place between places. During the day, the boundary is thin. People can come and go, though most drive right past without noticing us. But at night, she shook her head. At night, the boundary thickens. Nothing gets in or out until dawn. Martin glanced at his watch. It was just past 3 a.m. So I'm stuck here until morning? I'm afraid so, Mags said. But you're safe here. As long as the salt lines hold and the iron stays in place. Martin wasn't so sure. The house suddenly felt too small, too fragile against the wrongness outside. He thought of the clerk at the gas station, his throat torn open, and shuddered. Why did they kill that man at the gas station? He asked. Mags's expression darkened. They're hungry, Mr. Caldwell. Hungry for what they've lost. They think that by consuming the living, they can regain their humanity. It doesn't work, of course. Nothing does. But they keep trying. A loud thump from outside made them both jump. Something had hit the side of the house. Something heavy. Mags gestured for Martin to stay silent. They listened as scratching sounds moved along the exterior wall, followed by a low, keening moan. They know you're here, Mags whispered. They can smell the life in you, the memories. The scratching grew more insistent, moving toward the back of the house. Martin felt his heart rate accelerate. What do they want? They want in, Mags said simply. They always do. The noise stopped abruptly. Martin and Mags sat in tense silence, waiting. Then, from another part of the house, came the sound of breaking glass. The back bedroom, Mags said, rising quickly. Come on. Martin followed her through the house to a small bedroom at the rear. A window was broken, shards of glass littering the floor. The salt line was disturbed, grains scattered by the impact. And reaching through the broken window was a gray hand, its fingers too long, joints bending in the wrong directions. It groped blindly, searching for the window lock. Mags moved with surprising speed for her age. She grabbed a fireplace poker leaning against the wall and brought it down hard on the hand. There was a sharp, inhuman shriek from outside, and the hand withdrew. The salt, Mags ordered, pointing to the jar Martin still carried. Quickly, Martin rushed forward and poured a new line across the windowsill, careful to make it thick and unbroken. As soon as the salt was in place, the shrieking outside stopped, but they could still hear movement. Multiple sets of feet circling the house, probing for weaknesses. Will this hold them? Martin asked, his voice barely above a whisper. For now, Mags said, but she didn't sound convinced. We need to reinforce the other windows. They'll keep trying. They moved through the house, checking each window and door, adding more salt where the lines looked thin. Martin's hands were shaking, and he'd spilled more salt than he'd intended. But Mags didn't comment. Why don't you leave? He asked as they worked. If the boundary is open during the day, why stay in this hellhole? Mags's expression was grim. I tried once, got as far as Bangor, but I started to fade, not like them, but in a different way. Parts of me just disappeared. I lost time, lost memories. By the time I got back to Millhaven, I couldn't remember my own grandson's name. She shook her head. This place has its hooks in us, Mr. Caldwell. The ones who changed and the ones who didn't. We're bound to it now. That's insane, Martin said. There has to be a way out. If there is, I haven't found it, Mags replied. And I've been looking for 30 years. A loud crash from the front of the house cut their conversation short. The front door was shuddering under the impact of something heavy. They're getting bolder, Mags said, a tremor in her voice. The salt usually keeps them from touching the house directly. Another crash and the door frame splintered. The iron bar that Mags had placed across it bent but held. How many are out there? Martin asked. Hard to say, Mags replied. 20? 30? Most of the town has changed by now. The pounding on the door stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. Martin and Mags looked at each other, both understanding that the silence was somehow worse than the noise. Then a voice called from outside. A child's voice, high and clear. Grandma? Grandma, I'm scared. Please let me in. Mags's face drained of color. Don't listen, she whispered to Martin. It's not real. It's not him. Grandma, please. The voice called again, more insistent now. The monsters are coming. I need to come inside. Mags pressed her hands over her ears, tears streaming down her face. It's not real, she repeated. It's not Joshua. Joshua is gone. Martin put a hand on her shoulder, steadying her. "Stay here," he said. "I'll check." "No!" Mags grabbed his arm. "That's what they want. To separate us. To make us vulnerable." Before Martin could respond, the child's voice changed, transforming mid-sentence into something else. Something older and colder, with none of the innocence it had been mimicking. "We see you, Margaret," the voice said. "We see your guest. The boundary let him in. The boundary will keep him here. He'll be one of us soon." "Ignore it," Mags said, but her voice was shaking. "They're trying to scare us, to make us do something stupid." The voice outside laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "We're already inside, Margaret. We've always been inside. In your head, in your heart, in the forgotten spaces between your memories." As if to emphasize the point, the lights flickered and went out, plunging the house into darkness. Martin fumbled for his flashlight, turning it on just in time to see a gray figure step through the solid wall of the living room. No broken window, no open door, just passing through as if the wall were smoke. Mags screamed, a sound of pure terror that made Martin's blood freeze. He grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the kitchen, away from the intruder. But when they reached the kitchen doorway, another figure was there. A young boy with black eyes and gray skin, his mouth stretched in that same wrong smile. "Hello, Grandma," the boy said, his voice the one they'd heard outside. "Joshua," Mags whispered, her resistance crumbling. She reached toward the boy, her hand trembling. "No!" Martin yanked her back. "It's not him. It's one of them." The boy's smile widened, literally splitting his face from ear to ear as his jaw unhinged like a snake's. Behind him, more gray figures were materializing through walls and floors, surrounding them. Martin looked around desperately for a weapon, something to fight them off with. His eyes fell on the gas stove where Mags had made the tea. An idea formed, a terrible, desperate idea. "Mags," he said urgently, "is there any other way out of the house? A basement? An attic?" Mags seemed to snap out of her trance. "The attic," she said. "There's a hatch in the ceiling of the back bedroom. It leads to the roof." "Go," Martin said, shoving her toward the hallway. "Now, I'll be right behind you." Mags hesitated only briefly before running down the hall. The gray figures moved to follow her, but Martin stepped between them and the hallway. "Hey!" he shouted. "You want fresh meat? I'm right here." The figures paused, their black eyes fixing on him. The one that had been Joshua tilted its head, that same puppet-like movement that made Martin's skin crawl. "You're not from here," it said, its voice no longer childlike, but a chorus of many voices speaking as one. "You don't belong." "No," Martin agreed, backing toward the stove. "I'm just passing through. But you should know something about outsiders. We tend to bring change with us." In one fluid movement, he turned the gas knobs on the stove to full, the hiss of escaping gas filling the kitchen. The gray figures seemed to understand the danger immediately. They surged forward as one, their movements suddenly fast and predatory. Martin grabbed a kitchen towel and his lighter, setting the cloth ablaze. The gray figures were almost on him, their hands, cold and wrong, reaching for his throat. He threw the burning towel toward the stove and ran, sprinting down the hallway as the gas ignited behind him with a whoosh that quickly became a roar. The heat at his back propelled him forward as flames engulfed the kitchen and spread to the living room. He found Mags in the back bedroom, standing on a chair, pushing at a wooden hatch in the ceiling. Martin rushed to help her, boosting her up through the opening as smoke began to fill the room. "Go!" he shouted. "Get to the roof." Mags disappeared through the hatch. Martin could hear the crackle of flames drawing closer. He jumped, grabbing the edge of the hatch opening, and pulled himself up with strength born of desperation. The attic was small and dusty, illuminated only by the beam of his flashlight and the orange glow coming through the open hatch. Mags was already at the far end, pushing open a small window that led to the roof. Martin followed her, coughing as smoke began to fill the attic. They squeezed through the window onto the roof, the cedar shingles slick with the light rain that had begun to fall. Below them, the house was fully engulfed in flames. The fire spread with unnatural speed, consuming the dry wood of the old Victorian. And around the burning building, gray figures stood in a circle, their black eyes reflecting the flames, their wrong mouths open in silent screams. "They can't reach us here," Mag said, huddling against the brick chimney. "Fire cleanses. It reminds them of what they once were. They're afraid of it." Martin wasn't sure if that was true or if Mags was just trying to reassure herself, but the gray figures did seem to be keeping their distance from the burning house. They watched, unmoving, as the fire consumed what had been Mags's refuge for decades. "I'm sorry about your house," Martin said. Mags shook her head. "It was never really mine. Nothing in Millhaven belongs to anyone anymore." She looked up at the sky, where the clouds were beginning to thin. "Dawn's coming. We just need to hold out a little longer." They sat in silence, watching the fire below and the gray figures around it. The rain fell harder, soaking them both, but neither complained. It was the least of their worries. As the eastern sky began to lighten, the gray figures grew restless. They moved back and forth, their movements jerky and anxious. One by one, they began to retreat, melting into the shadows between buildings or simply fading from sight. By the time the sun's first rays touched the roof of the burning house, they were gone. All of them. Mags exhaled a long, shaky breath. "It's over. For now." The fire department arrived 20 minutes later, along with police cars and curious onlookers. Martin and Mags were helped off the roof by firefighters who asked a lot of questions that they answered vaguely. "A gas leak," they said. "An old stove. Lucky to be alive." No one questioned their story. No one mentioned the gray figures or the dead clerk at the gas station. It was as if those things had never happened. As Martin stood by an ambulance, a blanket wrapped around his shoulders, he watched the townspeople, normal people with normal eyes and normal skin, go about their business. They looked at the burning house with concern, but there was something else in their expressions too. A knowingness, a careful avoidance of certain questions. Mags appeared at his side, her face streaked with soot, her eyes red from smoke and tears. "You should go now," she said quietly. "While the boundary is open. I've arranged for a tow truck to pick up your car and take it to the garage. They'll give you a loaner to get home." Martin frowned. Why is everyone acting like this is normal? Like nothing happened last night? "Because to acknowledge it would be to remember it," Mags said. "And remembering is dangerous in Millhaven. It makes you a target." She pressed something into his hand, a small cloth bag. "Salt and iron filings. Carry it with you, at least until you're far away from here." "Come with me," Martin said suddenly. "We'll figure out how to break whatever connection is keeping you here." Mags smiled sadly. "It's too late for me, Mr. Caldwell. I've been here too long. I'm part of this place now, for better or worse." She patted his hand. "But thank you for the offer. It's been a long time since anyone cared what happened to old Mags Holloway." A police officer approached them, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Caldwell? Your car is ready at Henley's garage, just down the street. They'll need your license and insurance information." Martin nodded, still looking at Mags. "Will you be okay?" "I always am," she said. "The town provides for its own, even those of us who resist the change." She looked toward the burned shell of her house. "I have a sister in Derry. I'll stay with her until something can be arranged." Martin wanted to say more to make sure she would be safe, but the officer was waiting, and some part of him, a primal, instinctive part, was screaming at him to get out of Millhaven as quickly as possible. He found his car at the garage along with a loaner, a battered Ford Taurus that had seen better days but would get him back to Boston. The mechanic barely looked at him as he signed the paperwork, his movements mechanical, his eyes never quite meeting Martin's. As he drove out of town, Martin kept glancing in the rearview mirror, expecting to see gray figures following him or the town itself shifting and changing. But there was only the road, straight and ordinary in the morning light, and the Welcome to Millhaven sign receding in the distance. He passed a familiar gas station. Not the one from last night, but similar, and pulled over. He needed coffee, needed to clear his head and process what had happened. The events of the night were already taking on a dreamlike quality, slipping away from him like water through cupped hands. Inside the gas station, a cheerful clerk rang up his coffee and a breakfast sandwich. "Passing through?" the man asked conversationally. "Yeah," Martin said. "Just heading back to Boston." "Nice day for a drive," the clerk commented. "Careful on Route 7, though. They're doing construction, and it backs up something fierce around rush hour." "I'll keep that in mind," Martin said, reaching for his wallet. As he did, his sleeve rode up, revealing a mark on his wrist he hadn't noticed before. A grayish discoloration about the size of a quarter. It looked like a bruise but felt cold to the touch. The clerk's smile faltered slightly, his eyes flicking to the mark and then quickly away. "Have a safe trip," he said, his tone no longer quite so friendly. Martin paid and left, an uneasy feeling settling in his stomach. In the car, he examined the mark more closely. It wasn't a bruise, the skin wasn't tender, and the color was wrong. It was a perfect circle of gray skin, slightly cooler than the surrounding area. He remembered Mags's words. "When a place is forgotten, Mr. Caldwell, it starts to fade, not just from memory but from reality itself. And the people who live there, they fade too. They become something else, something in between." Martin pulled back his sleeve further, his heart hammering in his chest. Was it spreading? Had those things infected him somehow? Or was this what Mags had meant about Millhaven having its hooks in people? He drove faster than he should have, eager to put distance between himself and that town. He turned on the radio, desperate for noise, for normality. An upbeat pop song filled the car, and he cranked the volume, letting it drown out his thoughts. By the time he reached the interstate, the gray mark on his wrist had faded somewhat, no longer as vivid as it had been. Martin told himself it was just a trick of the light, or maybe an allergic reaction to something in Mags's house. Nothing to worry about. The miles slipped by, and with them, the sharp edges of his memories of Millhaven. By the time he crossed into Massachusetts, those memories had taken on the quality of a particularly vivid nightmare, disturbing but increasingly unreal. He arrived at his apartment building as evening was falling, exhausted and disoriented. The familiar hallway, the worn carpet, the scuff marks on his door, they all seemed suddenly precious anchors to reality that he hadn't appreciated before. Inside, he dropped his keys on the counter and headed straight for the shower, standing under the hot water until his skin was red and his muscles had stopped trembling. As he dried off, he deliberately avoided looking at his wrist. His phone was filled with missed calls and texts, work wondering where he was, friends checking in after the funeral, normal life waiting to reclaim him. He sent off a few brief responses, promising to catch up properly tomorrow, then fell into bed, sleep claiming him almost instantly. He dreamed of empty roads and gray figures with two wide mouths. He dreamed of Mags's house burning, but in the dream, he was trapped inside, watching as gray hands reached for him through the flames. He dreamed of a highway that never ended, that looped back on itself no matter how far he drove. And he dreamed of a voice, not one voice but many, speaking as one, whispering, "You're part of us now, part of Millhaven. You'll never really leave." Martin woke with a start, his heart racing, his sheets soaked with sweat. His bedroom was dark, the digital clock on his nightstand reading 3:17 a.m., the same time he'd entered Millhaven. Something felt wrong. The air in the room was too cold, too still, and there was a smell, faint but unmistakable, of smoke and something else, something rotten. He reached for the lamp on his nightstand, but as his fingers brushed the switch, he froze. There was someone in the room with him. He could feel it, a presence, a wrongness in the air. Slowly, he turned his head toward the corner of the bedroom. A figure stood there, gray and still, its outline blurry in the darkness. But he could make out the black eyes and the too wide mouth, stretched in that familiar, terrible smile. "No," Martin whispered. "You can't be here. Not in Boston. Not outside of Millhaven." The figure tilted its head, that same puppet-like movement. "Millhaven is wherever the forgotten are, Martin Caldwell," it said, Its voice the chorus he remembered from the night before. "And you have something that belongs to us." "What?" Martin's voice was barely audible, even to his own ears. "What do I have?" "Memory," the figure said. "You remember us. You took that memory away from Millhaven. Now you must return it, or become part of it." Martin lunged for the lamp, finally managing to turn it on. Light flooded the room, harsh and sudden, and the figure was gone. The corner where it had stood was empty, no trace that anything had been there at all. He sat up in bed, his breath coming in short gasps. Had he imagined it? Another nightmare, bleeding into wakefulness? Martin got up, checking every corner of his apartment, turning on all the lights. There was no sign of an intruder, no hint that anything was amiss. But the feeling of wrongness persisted, a crawling sensation at the back of his neck that wouldn't go away. In the bathroom, he finally forced himself to look at his wrist. The gray mark was still there, but it had changed. What had been a simple discoloration now formed a distinct pattern. A circle with radiating lines, like a child's drawing of the sun. Or like a boundary, with paths leading in and out. He tried to scrub it off, using soap and a washcloth, then alcohol, then a kitchen scouring pad that left the surrounding skin raw and bleeding but didn't affect the mark at all. Finally, exhausted and scared, Martin sat at his kitchen table and tried to think. If this was real, if Millhaven and its gray inhabitants were real, then he needed help. But who would believe him? Who could possibly understand what he was facing? The answer came to him suddenly: his father. His father had known about Millhaven, had warned him in his own indirect way. Maybe there was something in his personal effects, something that could explain what was happening. Martin went to the closet where he'd stashed the small box of his father's belongings, the one he'd tossed in his trunk after the funeral. He hadn't bothered to look through it yet, assuming it contained nothing but old photographs and useless mementos. The box was simple cardboard, taped shut, with Dad's things written on the side in his sister's neat handwriting. He cut through the tape and opened it, sorting through the contents. A watch, a wedding ring, some old letters from his mother, a small Bible. And at the bottom, wrapped in yellowed newspaper, a small leather-bound journal. Martin unwrapped it carefully, the paper crumbling beneath his fingers. The journal was worn, the leather cracked and darkened with age. Inside, his father's handwriting filled the pages. Tight, controlled script that matched the stern, reserved man Martin remembered. Most of the entries were mundane. Notes on weather, work schedules, brief mentions of family events. But as Martin flipped through the pages, a name jumped out at him: Millhaven. The entry was dated September 12, 1975. Asterisk passed through Millhaven today. Something wrong with that place. Road kept looping back. People watching from windows not right somehow. Finally got out when sun came up. Gray mark on arm faded after about a week. Don't go back. Asterisk. Martin's blood ran cold. His father had experienced the same thing. The looping roads, the strange people, even the gray mark. And he'd escaped just as Martin had. He flipped forward several pages, finding another entry. Asterisk dreams about Millhaven again. Third night in a row. They're calling me back. Need to find a way to stop this. Asterisk. And then, a week later, Asterisk talked to Old Man Winters about Millhaven. He's heard of it. Says it's a thin place. Whatever that means. Gave me some herbs to burn and salt to carry. Says I need to settle my debt with the town. Not sure what that means. Herbs smell terrible but seem to help with the dreams. Asterisk. Martin read through the rest of the journal, finding scattered references to Millhaven over the years, growing less frequent but more desperate. His father had been fighting against the town's pull for decades, using folk remedies and rituals that he clearly didn't understand but followed faithfully. The final entry about Millhaven was dated just 2 years ago. Asterisk gray mark returned, bigger this time, spreading up my arm. Winters is dead. No one else to ask. Running out of the herbs. Don't know what to do. Can't tell the family, they think I'm crazy. Maybe I am, but those things are real, and they're patient. Asterisk. Martin closed the journal, his mind racing. His father had been dealing with this for almost 50 years. Had the cancer that killed him been natural, or was it something else? Had Millhaven finally claimed him, in the end? And what did it mean to settle his debt with the town? He checked his wrist again. The gray mark seemed to have grown slightly, the radiating lines extending further across his skin. Not his imagination, then. The clock on the microwave read 4:30 a.m. Dawn wasn't far off. If Millhaven operated on the same rules everywhere, maybe the gray figures couldn't reach him during daylight. Maybe he'd be safe until sunset. But what then? He couldn't keep running forever. Sooner or later, they would catch him, just as they'd caught his father. Martin made a decision. He wouldn't run. He would face this head-on, try to understand it, try to find a way to break free of Millhaven's grip before it was too late. He spent the day researching, starting with thin places, a Celtic concept referring to locations where the barrier between this world and the other world was porous. From there, he delved into folklore about liminal spaces, forgotten towns, and the concept of genius loci, the spirit of a place. None of it provided concrete answers, but a pattern emerged. Places that were abandoned or forgotten sometimes developed a kind of consciousness, a hunger to be remembered, and they would feed on the memories and life force of those who passed through them. By evening, Martin had a theory. Millhaven was a forgotten town that had become a kind of psychic parasite, feeding on memories and trying to pull itself back into existence by claiming outsiders. His father had been partially claimed but had found ways to resist. Now it was Martin's turn. As the sun began to set, he prepared himself. He laid salt across his windowsills and doorway, just as Mags had done. He brewed a tea similar to what she had given him, using herbs mentioned in his father's journal. And he wrote down everything he could remember about Millhaven, forcing himself to confront the memories that part of him wanted to forget. Night fell, and with it came the familiar cold stillness that signaled he was not alone. Martin sat in his living room, a circle of salt surrounding his chair, the journal open on his lap, waiting. They materialized gradually this time, not just one but several gray figures forming out of the shadows in his apartment. They moved with that same wrong fluidity, surrounding his circle of salt but not crossing it. "You understand now," one of them said, the same chorus of voices he'd heard before. "You know what we are, what we need. You need to be remembered," Martin said, surprised at how steady his voice was. "You feed on memories, on connections to the outside world." "Yes," the figure agreed, "and you have powerful memories of us, fresh ones. We can feel them, bright and hot in your mind." "My father resisted you for decades," Martin said. "I can do the same." The gray figure that seemed to be the leader smiled its too wide smile. "Your father was strong, but he tired eventually. Everyone does." "What happens if I give in?" Martin asked. "If I let you take my memories? You become one of us," another figure said. "Neither here nor there, neither remembered nor forgotten, a guardian of the boundary. And if I resist, then we hunt you," the leader said simply. "We follow you, through dreams and shadows. We take pieces of you one by one, your skin, your eyes, your heart, until there's nothing left but gray." Martin nodded slowly. Neither option was acceptable. There had to be another way. Something his father had missed, something Mags hadn't known. "There's a third option," he said, an idea forming. "I could remember you, properly. Make sure others remember you too." The gray figures went still, their black eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made his skin crawl. "Explain," the leader demanded. "I'm a writer," Martin lied, the plan taking shape as he spoke. "I can tell your story, make Millhaven famous or infamous. Either way, you'd be remembered. Isn't that what you want?" The gray figures conferred among themselves, a whispered conversation in a language that hurt Martin's ears. Finally, the leader turned back to him. "Words on paper are not enough," it said. "They can be ignored, forgotten." "Then I'll make it more," Martin said. "A book, a movie, whatever it takes. But you have to give me time, and you have to let me go, completely. No marks, no dreams, no visitations. Another hushed conference. The gray figures seemed agitated, moving back and forth, their forms blurring at the edges. "We accept," the leader finally said. "1 year. You will make Millhaven remembered. If you fail, you become ours, completely and forever." "Deal," Martin said, hoping he wasn't making a terrible mistake. The leader approached the salt circle, extending a gray hand. "The pact requires blood," it said, "a binding that cannot be broken." Martin hesitated, then reached out, his hand crossing the salt barrier. The gray figure grasped his wrist, its touch like ice. A sharp pain shot up Martin's arm as the figure's fingers sank into his flesh, not breaking the skin but somehow phasing through it. When it withdrew its hand, the gray mark on Martin's wrist was gone. In its place was a small scar, shaped like a circle with radiating lines. "1 year," the gray figure repeated. "We will be watching." And then they were gone, melting back into the shadows as if they had never been there. The air in the apartment felt lighter, warmer. Martin could breathe again. He looked down at the scar on his wrist. A reminder and a deadline. 1 year to make Millhaven remembered or to find another solution. The next morning, Martin quit his job. He withdrew his savings, sublet his apartment, and drove back to Maine. Not to Millhaven. He wasn't ready for that yet, but to Portland, where his father's journey had begun and ended. He rented a small cabin outside the city, set up a workspace, and began to research in earnest. He tracked down old maps showing Millhaven's location before the interstate was built. He found newspaper articles about the town's decline. And, most importantly, he found other people who had passed through Millhaven and survived to tell the tale. They were scattered across New England. A truck driver in New Hampshire, a retired professor in Vermont, a nurse in Massachusetts. Each had their own story of wrong roads and gray people with black eyes. Each bore a mark somewhere on their body, some fresh, some old and faded. And each had been fighting the pull of Millhaven in their own way. Martin brought them together, comparing notes, building a more complete picture of what Millhaven was and how it operated. The town existed in a kind of pocket dimension, a fold in reality created by neglect and abandonment. It could be entered accidentally, but leaving required more than just crossing the boundary. It required some kind of exchange. "It's like the old fairy tales," the professor explained. "You can't just take from the Fey realm without giving something in return. Millhaven takes memories, identity, humanity, unless you offer it something else." "Like what?" Martin asked. "Something personal, something meaningful," the professor said. "I left my wedding ring there, dropped it deliberately at the town line as I was leaving. 30 years of marriage in that gold band. A fair trade for my freedom, I thought." He laughed bitterly. "My wife didn't see it that way, left me a year later, said I'd changed, wasn't the man she married." The others had similar stories. The truck driver had left his lucky charm, a medallion his father had given him. The nurse had left a locket containing a picture of her deceased daughter. Each sacrifice had bought them temporary freedom, but Millhaven's pull remained. "It's got to be more than just remembering the town," the nurse said. "We've all been obsessed with it for years. Hasn't made a difference. What if we went public?" Martin suggested. "Shared our stories with the world?" The others exchanged glances. "Tried that," the truck driver said. "Talk to reporters, post it online. People think you're crazy or attention-seeking. And the stories, they change. Details get lost or twisted. It's like the town actively resists being documented." "Then we need to go back," Martin said. "All of us, together. Find a way to break its hold once and for all." They agreed reluctantly. None of them wanted to return to Millhaven, but all understood that they were living on borrowed time. The town would claim them eventually if they didn't act. They spent months preparing, gathering supplies, studying old rituals and protections. They consulted with experts in the paranormal, with priests and psychics, and anyone who might have insight into their situation. 3 days before the anniversary of Martin's escape from Millhaven, his deadline, they set out. For people in 2 cars, loaded with salt and iron and herbs and more esoteric materials. They had a plan, cobbled together from a dozen different sources, to close the breach between worlds that Millhaven had become. The drive to where Millhaven should have been was tense and silent. Martin led the way, his father's journal on the seat beside him, the scar on his wrist throbbing in time with his heartbeat. They arrived at sunset, pulling off the main road onto a dirt track that wasn't marked on any modern map. The Welcome to Millhaven sign was there, as weathered and bullet-riddled as Martin remembered. "I'll wait here," the professor said, his face pale. I can't go back in. I'll monitor the boundary from this side." The others nodded in understanding. Each of them had their role to play. As darkness fell, Martin, the truck driver, and the nurse entered Millhaven. The town was as Martin remembered it. Empty streets, darkened buildings, an oppressive silence broken only by the distant sound of static. They made their way to the center of town, to a small park with a gazebo that the nurse remembered from her time there. According to their research, this was the heart of Millhaven, the point where the boundary between worlds was thinnest. They worked quickly, laying out salt lines, setting up candles, preparing the ritual that would, theoretically, close the breach and free them from Millhaven's influence. They were almost ready when the gray figures appeared, dozens of them, emerging from the shadows surrounding the park. Among them, Martin recognized the woman from the gas station, her too wide mouth set in a grimace. "You promised to make us remembered," she said, her voice the same chorus as before. "You have failed." "No," Martin said. "We found a better way, a way to set you free. All of you." "We don't want freedom," another figure said, the boy who had called himself Joshua. "We want to be remembered, to be real again." "You can't be," the nurse said gently. "That's not how the world works. Places change. People move on. Nothing stays the same forever." "We can," the gray figures said in unison. "We have. We will." They began to move forward, crossing the salt lines as if they weren't there. The ritual wasn't complete, they needed more time. "Start the chant," Martin told the others, stepping forward to confront the gray figures. "I'll hold them off." The truck driver and the nurse began to recite the words they'd memorized, a mixture of Latin and Celtic and something older still. Martin stood between them and the approaching figures, his father's journal clutched to his chest like a shield. "I remember you," he said to the gray figures. "I remember Millhaven as it was, before the interstate, before you were forgotten. I've seen the photographs, read the stories. This was a good place once, a real place." Some of the gray figures hesitated, their movements becoming less certain. "My father remembered you too," Martin continued. "He carried Millhaven with him for 50 years, fought against it but never forgot. And now I understand why." He opened the journal to the last page, where his father had written a final entry, one Martin hadn't noticed before, hidden in the binding. Millhaven isn't just a place. It's a warning, a reminder of what happens when we lose connection to the world around us, when we let ourselves be forgotten, when we forget ourselves. Couldn't save it. Maybe no one can. But I'll remember. That has to count for something. Asterisk. "He was right," Martin said, addressing the gray figures. "Forgetting is a kind of death, but so is refusing to let go. You've been holding on to something that doesn't exist anymore, a version of yourselves, of this town that's long gone. That's what's trapped you here." The chanting behind him grew louder, the air around them beginning to shimmer with an otherworldly light. The gray figures were agitated now, some advancing, others retreating, their forms becoming less distinct. "Let go," Martin urged them. "Let yourselves be what you are now, memory, history, the past. Stop trying to feed on the present. We will be forgotten," the woman from the gas station said, her voice now singular, almost human. "We will be nothing." "No," Martin said. "You'll be at peace. Isn't that better than this half-existence? This hunger that can never be satisfied?" The light around them intensified, the chanting reaching a crescendo. The gray figures began to dissolve, their forms becoming transparent, revealing glimpses of what they had once been, normal people with normal lives, caught in a moment that had stretched into eternity. "Remember us," the woman said, her voice fading. "Please." "I will," Martin promised. "But not like this. Not as monsters. As people. As a town that lived and died like any other. That's the truth of Millhaven." The light flashed, blindingly bright, and Martin felt something tear. Not physical but metaphysical. A rending of the fabric between worlds. The gray figures disappeared. Not with screams or struggle, but with sighs of release, of surrender. When the light faded, the three of them were alone in the park. The oppressive silence was gone, replaced by normal night sounds. Crickets, distant traffic, the rustle of leaves in the breeze. "Did it work?" the nurse asked, her voice hoarse from chanting. Martin looked at his wrist. The scar was still there, but it no longer throbbed. It felt like any other old injury, a reminder but not a connection. "I think so," he said. "But there's one way to be sure." They walked back to the town limits, to where the Welcome to Millhaven sign stood. Beyond it, they could see the professor waiting anxiously by his car. Martin stepped over the boundary first, half expecting to find himself looping back into town. But he crossed without incident, the solid ground of the world beyond Millhaven beneath his feet. The others followed, and together they looked back at the town. In the moonlight, Millhaven looked ordinary. Old buildings, empty streets, a place that had simply been left behind by time and progress. Nothing supernatural, nothing menacing, just sad. "What happens now?" the truck driver asked. "To the town, I mean. It fades," the professor said, "but naturally this time, the way forgotten places are supposed to. It becomes ruins, then foundations, then nothing but a name on old maps. That's how the world works." Martin nodded, thinking of his father's final entry. A warning and a reminder. "And us? Are we free?" The professor shrugged. "As free as anyone ever is from their past. We'll always carry Millhaven with us. But as memory, not as a curse." They stood there for a while longer, watching the town that had haunted them for so long. Then, one by one, they returned to their cars and drove away, back toward the lights of the interstate, toward the flow of life and time that Millhaven had tried to escape. Martin was the last to leave. Before he got into his car, he took one final look at the Welcome to Millhaven sign. In the darkness, he could almost imagine those gray figures standing behind it, watching him go. But it was just shadows, just the play of moonlight on weathered wood. He touched the scar on his wrist. "I remember," he said softly. "That's my promise. That's my debt paid." Then he turned away, leaving Millhaven to fade into history, into story, where the forgotten things go to rest. As he drove toward the interstate, the radio came to life unprompted. For a moment, Martin tensed, expecting that flat, monotone voice with its warnings. Instead, he heard the opening chords of "Don't Fear the Reaper." He smiled and turned up the volume, letting the music fill the car as the miles rolled by, taking him further and further from Millhaven with every passing second. By the time he reached Boston, the scar on his wrist had faded to a thin white line, barely visible in the right light. But it was still there, like Millhaven itself, diminished but not gone completely. A reminder of what happens when places and people are forgotten. Martin never told the full story of what happened in Millhaven. But he did write a book, a novel about a forgotten town where the boundary between worlds had thinned, where the past refused to stay buried. He changed the names, altered the details, made it just fictional enough that no one would think to look for the real Millhaven. The book was published to modest success. Not a bestseller, but enough to keep Millhaven alive in the collective imagination of its readers. Enough to fulfill his promise to remember. And on cold nights, when the wind whispers through the trees and the shadows seem to move of their own accord, Martin sometimes finds himself thinking of those gray figures with their black eyes and wrong mouths. He wonders if they found peace, if the ritual truly freed them from their half-existence. Or if, perhaps, they're still there, in Millhaven or in places like it, waiting for travelers who take wrong turns on dark roads, who find themselves in towns that shouldn't exist, that aren't on any modern map, waiting to be remembered, or to make others forget. the weathering. The first time Ellie Braden heard the rain talking, she was stacking the last of her dead husband's shirts into a cardboard donation box. Ellie, it whispered against the bedroom window, a sound like fingernails tapping on glass. We know what you did. She froze, a blue Oxford shirt clutched in her hands. The fabric still smelled faintly of Michael's aftershave, that woody scent she'd grown to hate. Outside, the October rain lashed against the weathered clapboard of her home on the outskirts of Kingfield, Maine. The storm had been raging for 3 days, the longest in county memory. I didn't do anything, she whispered back, though no one was there to hear. The coroner had ruled Michael's death an accident. A tragic fall down the basement stairs after a night of drinking. No one questioned it. Not in a town where folks kept to themselves and Michael Braden had been known to knock back a fifth of whiskey on his worst days. Not when everyone secretly knew about the bruises Ellie covered with long sleeves even in July. The rain's whispers faded, replaced by the steady drumming that had been the soundtrack to her grief, or whatever this hollow feeling was, for the past week. Maybe she was losing her mind. Stress and lack of sleep could do that. Her mother had suffered from auditory hallucinations before her stroke took her. These things ran in families. Ellie folded the shirt with careful precision and placed it in the box. She had 19 days until the life insurance money would be deposited. The company's representative had assured her that everything was in order. An accident. A tragic accident. She could start fresh, somewhere warm and dry. Arizona, maybe, or New Mexico, somewhere the rain couldn't find her. 2. The following morning, Ellie drove into town for groceries. Main Street looked half-drowned, puddles gathering in the dips of the asphalt, the brick storefronts dark with moisture. The rain had slowed to a persistent drizzle that wormed its way beneath collars and sleeves. Inside Harrison's general store, she felt the stares. Small towns had long memories, and Kingfield's was longer than most. She'd been an outsider when Michael brought her here 12 years ago, and she remained one now. Sorry about your husband, said Wes Harrison as he rang up her items. Terrible thing. His voice carried the obligatory sympathy, but his eyes held something else, something calculating. Thank you, Ellie replied, the words automatic after a week of condolences. Been raining something fierce, he continued. They're saying it might flood over by the river. You're up on the hill, though. Should be safe enough. That's good to hear. Seems like it started the day after Michael's accident. Hasn't let up since. She met his gaze, noting the way his eyes narrowed slightly. Weather's unpredictable this time of year. That it is. He handed her the paper bag of groceries. You take care now, Ellie. Outside, the rain seemed to intensify as she stepped from the store. It hissed against her raincoat, and there it was again. A voice in the static, whispering words she couldn't quite make out. She hurried to her car, the paper bag growing damp in her arms. As she loaded the groceries into the trunk, a hand touched her shoulder. Ellie jumped, nearly dropping the carton of eggs she'd been holding. Didn't mean to startle you. Frank Denton, the town's police chief, stood beside her, his uniform dark with rain. Just wanted to check how you're holding up. Frank had been Michael's drinking buddy. They'd gone fishing together most Sundays, coming back smelling of beer and lake water, their stories never quite matching up. I'm managing, she said, trying to keep her voice neutral. Day by day, that's all any of us can do. He nodded, his eyes hidden beneath the brim of his cap. I wanted to let you know I'll be stopping by sometime this week. Just a few follow-up questions about the accident. Standard procedure. The egg carton cracked slightly in her grip. I've already told you everything. I know. His smile didn't reach his eyes, just crossing T's and dotting I's. You understand. As he walked away, the rain seemed to follow him, circling his boots in tiny whirlpools before fading into the pavement. He knows, thought Ellie. He can't prove it, but he knows. She slammed the trunk shut and got into the driver's seat, her wet hands leaving prints on the steering wheel. As she pulled onto Main Street, the rain began to drum a rhythm on the roof that sounded disturbingly like a voice counting backward from 10. 3. That night, the storm turned violent. Wind howled through the trees surrounding Ellie's house, snapping branches and hurling them against the walls. The electricity flickered once, twice, then died completely, plunging the house into darkness. Ellie lit candles, their amber glow making the shadows dance on the walls. The basement door, visible from where she sat at the kitchen table, seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. Stop it, she told herself. It's just an old house settling. She hadn't been down to the basement since that night. Couldn't bring herself to see the bottom step where Michael's head had struck the concrete, where his skull had cracked open like an egg. The rain grew louder, no longer a whisper but a roar. Water seeped beneath the back door, forming a thin, snake-like line across the kitchen floor. "You pushed him," said the rain, the words as clear as if someone had spoken directly into her ear. "We saw you. We were there." "No," Ellie said aloud, her voice sounding foreign in the empty house. "He was drunk. He fell. Your hands on his back. One push. That's all it took." She pressed her palms against her ears, but the voice persisted, seeping through her fingers like the rain through the walls. 18 days until the money comes, but you won't live to see it." A crash from upstairs sent her heart racing. Something had fallen or been pushed. Ellie grabbed a kitchen knife and a flashlight, forcing herself to climb the stairs. The hallway seemed to stretch before her, the beam of light illuminating dust motes that swirled like tiny ghosts. In the bedroom, the window had blown open, rain lashing the curtains and soaking the floor. Wind howled through the opening, carrying with it a smell like wet earth and decay. As Ellie struggled to close it, her flashlight beam caught something on the bed. A muddy footprint, too large to be hers. Her breath caught in her throat. Had someone been in the house? She spun around, knife held before her, but the room was empty. The footprint glistened in the flashlight beam, fresh and wet. As she watched, it seemed to sink into the comforter, the mud dissolving into the fabric until nothing remained but a damp spot. Ellie backed out of the room, her heart hammering against her ribs. She checked every room, every closet, finding nothing but shadows and the persistent whisper of rain. Finally, exhausted and trembling, she collapsed on the living room couch, the knife clutched to her chest. Sleep came in fitful bursts, her dreams filled with the sound of Michael's skull cracking against concrete and the sight of rain-forming hands that reached for her throat. For the next morning, the rain had stopped. Ellie woke to sunlight streaming through the windows, the house quiet except for the steady drip of water from the eaves. She moved through the rooms, opening windows to let in the fresh air, trying to convince herself that last night had been nothing but stress and an overactive imagination. The phone rang as she was making coffee, startling her so badly she spilled grounds across the counter. "Hello, Mrs. Braden?" The voice was unfamiliar, official. "This is Thomas Wilson from Northeastern Life Insurance. I'm calling about your husband's policy." Ellie's stomach clenched. "Is there a problem? We've received some information that requires us to reevaluate our initial findings. I'll need to schedule an in-person meeting with you to discuss the details." "What kind of information?" Pause. "I'm not at liberty to say over the phone, but it concerns the circumstances of your husband's death. I can be there tomorrow afternoon, if that works for you." After hanging up, Ellie stood motionless in the kitchen, the half-made coffee forgotten. Someone had said something, Frank maybe, or one of the neighbors who had always looked at her with suspicion because she wasn't a local. Or maybe, no, Rain couldn't talk to insurance investigators. That was insane. She needed to get rid of any evidence. Not that there was any, she'd been careful, so careful, but she needed to be sure. The basement, she hadn't cleaned it thoroughly that night, too shocked by what she'd done, too focused on making it look like an accident. Steeling herself, Ellie opened the basement door. The wooden steps creaked beneath her weight as she descended, the flashlight beam darting nervously around the unfinished space. Boxes of Christmas decorations, old furniture, tools hanging on pegboards. Everything exactly as it had been, except for the water. A thin layer covered the concrete floor, reflecting the flashlight beam like a dark mirror. It wasn't from flooding. The basement was dry as a bone even during the worst storms. This water had come from somewhere else. At the bottom of the stairs, a dark stain marked where Michael had fallen. Ellie approached it slowly, her shoes leaving ripples in the shallow water. The stain seemed to pulse, to breathe. As she knelt to examine it, the water around her feet began to move, streaming toward the stain as if drawn by gravity. It gathered there, building upon itself until it formed a small, quivering mound. The mound grew taller, taking shape. A hand, an arm, torso. Ellie scrambled backward, her scream caught in her throat. The water continued to rise, molding itself into a human form. Michael's form, his features rippling but unmistakable. "No," she whispered. "You're not real." The water Michael tilted its head, regarding her with eyes like dark whirlpools. Its mouth opened, and when it spoke, its voice was the sound of rain against a tin roof. "You killed me," it said. "You pushed me down these stairs and watched me die. You were hurting me," Ellie said, her voice thin and reedy. "For years. I couldn't take it anymore. Now you'll understand hurt." The figure began to dissolve, water streaming down its body and spreading across the floor, moving toward her with purpose. Ellie turned and fled up the stairs, slamming the basement door behind her. Water seeped beneath it immediately, forming a widening pool on the kitchen floor. She had to leave, now, before the insurance investigator arrived, before Frank came back with his questions, before whatever was in the basement found her. Hands shaking, she threw clothes into a suitcase, gathered her important documents, and emptied the emergency cash from its hiding place in the freezer. As she worked, the water continued to spread through the house, rising slowly but steadily. By the time she was ready to leave, it had reached the bottom of the staircase and was beginning to climb. The sound it made was no longer a whisper but a gurgle, like a man drowning, fighting for his last breath. Ellie grabbed her car keys and ran for the door. Outside, the sky was cloudless, a brilliant blue that mocked her terror. She threw her suitcase into the trunk and started the engine, tires spitting gravel as she tore down the driveway. In the rearview mirror, her house looked peaceful, normal. No sign of the water that had been rising inside. No sign of Michael's liquid ghost. Maybe she truly was losing her mind. 5. The highway stretched before her, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through dense Maine forest. Ellie pressed the accelerator, watching the speedometer climb. She had no destination in mind, only away. Away from Kingfield, away from the rain that spoke with her dead husband's voice. As she rounded a bend, the sky ahead darkened. Storm clouds gathered with unnatural speed, black and swollen with rain. They seemed to be forming directly in her path, a wall of impenetrable darkness. Ellie slowed the car, considering her options. She could turn around, try another route, or push through, hope the storm wasn't as bad as it looked. The decision was made for her when the engine sputtered and died. The car coasted to a stop on the shoulder, steam rising from beneath the hood. When she tried to restart it, the engine gave a sick grinding sound. Then nothing. "No, no, no," she muttered, slamming her palms against the steering wheel. The storm clouds were advancing now, rolling toward her like a wave of ink. The air grew heavy, charged with electricity. Ellie grabbed her phone to call for help, but there was no signal. Of course not. This stretch of highway was notorious for dead zones. She could wait for another car to pass, but how long would that take? And what if the wrong person stopped? The first drops of rain hit the windshield like bullets. Within seconds, a downpour engulfed the car, drumming on the roof with such ferocity that Ellie had to cover her ears. Through the curtain of rain, she saw something moving on the road ahead, a figure walking toward her. His gait was uneven, lurching. Ellie's breath fogged the window as she leaned forward, squinting through the downpour. The figure drew closer, taking shape. It was Michael, not the water ghost from the basement, but Michael as he'd been in life. 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered, his face set in that look of cold anger she'd come to dread. "You're not real," she whispered, shrinking back in her seat. The figure reached the car and pressed its face against her window. Water streamed from its hair, its clothes pooling at its feet. Its eyes were the dull gray of storm clouds. Ellie screamed as the window beside her shattered inward, showering her with glass. Hands made of water grabbed her arms, their grip as solid and cold as ice. They pulled her from the car, out into the storm. Rain lashed her face as she struggled, her feet slipping in the mud of the shoulder. The water hands dragged her toward the forest, away from the road where someone might see her, might help. "Please," she gasped, fighting to break free. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to kill him." But she had meant it. In that moment at the top of the stairs, watching Michael sway drunkenly, his mouth twisted in a sneer as he berated her for some imagined slight. She had wanted him dead, had placed her palms against his back and pushed with all the strength that 12 years of fear and resentment had given her. The water Michael leaned close, its face inches from hers. "The rain remembers," it whispered, voice gurgling like a drowning man's. The rain saw everything. It began to dissolve, melting into the downpour around them. But the hands holding Ellie remained, dragging her deeper into the woods where the trees loomed like sentinels, their branches reaching down like fingers. She fought with renewed desperation, her nails clawing at the mud, her heels digging into the soft earth. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the scene in stark white flashes. The hands pulled her toward a depression in the ground, a sinkhole filled with churning, frothing water. As she neared the edge, Ellie could see that it was far deeper than it should be, a bottomless well that hadn't existed before the rain. "You'll never have the money," said the rain, its voice coming from everywhere at once. "You'll never escape." The hands forced her to her knees at the edge of the sinkhole. Below, the water swirled hypnotically, and in its depths, Ellie saw faces, dozens of them, pale and bloated, eyes wide with terror, all of them looking up at her with recognition. She knew why Frank and Michael had gone fishing so often, knew why Michael had sometimes returned from these trips with scratches on his face that he'd never explain, knew why her husband had nightmares that made him thrash and cry out in his sleep. The sinkhole was a grave, and now it would be hers. As the hands pushed her forward, Ellie made one final, desperate lunge away from the edge. Her fingers found a tree root, and she clung to it, her body half suspended over the churning water. "I'll tell them," she screamed into the storm. "I'll tell everyone what he did, what you both did." The pressure on her back eased slightly. The rain's voice came again, softer now. "No one will believe you." "Maybe not," Ellie gasped, pulling herself inch by inch away from the edge. "But they'll look, they'll search, and they'll find what you've hidden." The hands withdrew, the water running off her body like mercury, gathering into a puddle that resembled a crouching figure. "You killed him," it said. "Yes," Ellie admitted, rising shakily to her feet. "And I'd do it again." They faced each other in the storm, woman and water, both killers, both with blood on their hands. The rain began to slacken, the clouds overhead thinning. The puddle at Ellie's feet shrank, losing its human shape, becoming nothing more than ordinary water soaking into the earth. In the sudden quiet, Ellie could hear a car approaching on the highway. Headlights swept through the trees, illuminating the forest in brief, yellow flashes. She turned and stumbled back toward the road, her clothes heavy with rain, her mind racing. The insurance money was gone. She couldn't go back to Kingfield, but she was alive, and she knew what Michael had done, what Frank had helped him do. The car slowed as it approached her disabled vehicle, its brake lights glowing red in the fading storm. As Ellie emerged from the trees, she saw the emblem on the car's door, the Kingfield Police Department. Frank stepped out, his hand resting casually on his holster. His eyes widened slightly when he saw her, drenched and mud-streaked. "Ellie," he said, his voice carrying in the stillness after the storm. "Car trouble." She nodded, watching him carefully. Did he know that she knew? Could he see the truth in her eyes? "Let me give you a ride back to town," he offered, opening the passenger door. "We can send someone for your car tomorrow." Ellie hesitated, looking back at the forest where the sinkhole waited, where the secrets were buried. Then she looked at Frank, at the careful neutrality of his expression, the tension in his shoulders. "Thank you," she said, walking toward the police car. "That's very kind." As she slid into the passenger seat, her hand brushed against something tucked beneath her thigh. A small tape recorder, its red light blinking steadily. Recording. Frank got in beside her, his uniform still immaculate despite the rain. As he started the engine, a single drop of water slid from his hair, down his temple, pausing at the corner of his mouth like a tear. "It's a funny thing about storms," he said, pulling onto the highway. "They have a way of washing away all sorts of things. Evidence. Tracks bodies." Ellie looked out the window, where the clouds were breaking apart, revealing patches of star-filled sky. In the distance, thunder rumbled, a retreating threat. "But not memories," she said softly. "Some things, the rain remembers." Frank's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "What's that supposed to mean?" Ellie smiled, her fingers curling around the tape recorder. "Nothing, just something I heard once." The police car accelerated into the night, carrying them back toward Kingfield. Behind them, the first drops of a new rainfall began to spatter on the road, whispering secrets only they could hear. As the windshield wipers began their rhythmic sweep, Ellie closed her eyes, listening to the rain tell its stories. It had 19 days to share them all. The lighthouse at Black Point. The beam cut through the fog, a momentary flash of light before darkness swallowed it again. Charlie Harker stood at the edge of the cliff, watching as the sentinel beam swept across the churning waters below. Once a minute, every minute. The rhythm had been the same for over 100 years. Funny how a light could feel like an old friend. "You're drunk again, aren't you?" Charlie didn't turn at the sound of his wife's voice. Sarah's footsteps crunched on the gravel behind him, hesitant at first, then drawing closer. Her hand, warm and small, touched his shoulder. "I'm fine," he said, though they both knew it was a lie. The half-empty whiskey bottle dangled from his fingertips, swinging gently in the coastal breeze. "You're standing 3 feet from a 200-foot drop," Sarah said. "That's not fine, Charlie." The lighthouse beam swept across them, momentarily illuminating Sarah's face. The worry lines around her eyes, the gray streaking her once auburn hair. When had she gotten so old? When had they both? "I wasn't going to jump," he said, finally turning to face her. "Just remembering." Sarah's expression softened. "It's been 20 years, Charlie. 20 years since their son had disappeared. 20 years of searching, of false leads and dashed hopes. 20 years of Sarah's quiet resilience and Charlie's slow descent into the bottle. "I know how long it's been," he said, more sharply than he'd intended. "I can count. Then maybe it's time to stop counting." Sarah took his hand, tugging him gently away from the cliff edge. "Let's go home. It's getting colder." Charlie allowed himself to be led away, but not before casting one last glance at the lighthouse. The beam swept across the water again, illuminating something he couldn't quite make out. A shadow moving against the current, something large beneath the surface. Probably just a trick of the light. Black Point was the kind of coastal Maine town tourists drove through on their way to somewhere else. One main street lined with weathered storefronts, a diner that had served the same mediocre coffee for 40 years, and a population that shrank every winter and swelled slightly every summer. Charlie had been born here, as had his father and grandfather before him. The Harkas had deep roots in Black Point, deeper than most suspected. Charlie's family had been the lighthouse keepers for generations, until automation had rendered them obsolete. Charlie was the first Harker who hadn't spent his life tending the light, and sometimes he wondered if that was why everything had gone wrong. A broken tradition, a broken family. The diner was nearly empty when Charlie pushed through the door the next morning, the bell jingling cheerfully above his head. His hangover pounded behind his eyes, but he'd been functioning with some version of this pain for so long it was almost comforting. "You look like hell warmed over," said Marge, the waitress who'd been serving him coffee since he was a teenager. She was in her 70s now, hair thinning but dyed a defiant shade of red, lined face perpetually arranged in an expression of mild disapproval. "Thanks for noticing," Charlie replied, sliding onto his usual stool at the counter. "Coffee. Black. Like your soul," Marge said, but she poured him a cup anyway, the liquid steaming invitingly. Charlie wrapped his hands around the mug, letting the warmth seep into his perpetually cold fingers. "Anything new?" It was their routine. Charlie would ask if anything was new, and Marge would tell him about some inconsequential piece of town gossip, and for a few minutes, Charlie could pretend to be a normal person having a normal conversation. But today, Marge hesitated. "What?" Charlie asked, suddenly alert. "They found something washed up on the beach this morning," she said, wiping the counter with unnecessary vigor. "Down by the rocks near the lighthouse." Charlie's pulse quickened. "What kind of something?" "I don't know all the details. Some kind of remains. Animal, they're saying." "Animal," Charlie repeated. "That's what I heard." Marge was avoiding his eyes now. Pete Drummond found it when he was checking his traps. Said it was like nothing he'd ever seen before. "All wrong," he said. Charlie's coffee sat forgotten as he processed this. "Wrong how?" "I don't know, Charlie, and I don't want to know. But they've got it over at Doc Wilson's place. He's trying to figure out what it is." Charlie was already reaching for his wallet, tossing a few bills on the counter. "Thanks, Marge." "Charlie," she called after him as he headed for the door. "Leave it alone. Some things are better not knowing." But Charlie was already gone, the bell jingling in his wake. Doc Wilson had been the town's veterinarian for as long as anyone could remember. He was also the closest thing Black Point had to a medical examiner, having taken some forensic courses during a brief stint in college before returning to take over his father's practice. The clinic was a small building on the edge of town, painted a cheerful blue that had faded to a muted gray over the years. Charlie parked his truck and sat for a moment, gathering his courage. 20 years of false leads had taught him to temper his expectations, but still, his heart hammered against his ribs. The bell above the door chimed as he entered. The waiting room was empty except for a teenage girl behind the reception desk, popping gum and scrolling through her phone. "I'm here to see Doc Wilson," Charlie said. The girl, Lizzie Prescott, if he remembered correctly, looked up with bored eyes. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but he'll want to see me. Tell him it's Charlie Harker." Lizzie sighed dramatically but picked up the phone. After a brief conversation, she nodded toward the back. "Go on through." The examination room smelled of antiseptic and something else. Something vaguely sweet and rotting. Doc Wilson stood hunched over a metal table, his back to the door. "Charlie," he said without turning around. "Figured you'd show up sooner or later. Marge said they found something." Wilson turned then, his expression grim. He was in his 60s, bald on top with wisps of white hair above his ears, a permanent furrow between his brows. "They found something," he confirmed. "But it's not what you're thinking." "Let me see it," Charlie said. Wilson hesitated, then stepped aside. On the table lay what appeared to be the partial remains of some kind of marine creature, except no marine creature Charlie had ever seen looked like this. It was roughly the size of a large dog, with mottled gray-green skin that shimmered oddly under the fluorescent lights. Where a head should have been, there was only a gaping, circular maw lined with rows of needle-like teeth. Multiple appendages, were they arms? Legs? Tentacles? Splayed out from the central mass, each ending in what looked disturbingly like human-like hands with elongated fingers. Charlie felt his stomach lurch. "What the hell is it?" "I don't know," Wilson said, sounding genuinely perplexed. "Some kind of deep-sea creature that got caught in a current. Maybe. Or a deformity. Nature produces some weird things sometimes." But Charlie wasn't convinced. There was something about the creature that felt deliberate, designed, as if it had been crafted rather than evolved. "Can I touch it?" he asked. Wilson frowned. "I wouldn't recommend it. We don't know if it's carrying any parasites or toxins." Charlie nodded absently, his eyes fixed on the thing's hand-like appendages. They were so human, yet so wrong, the fingers too long, the joints bending in impossible directions. "Have you called anyone?" "University researchers," Maybe. I've made some calls, Wilson said. But honestly, Charlie, I don't think this has anything to do with what happened to Danny. Danny. His son's name hit him like a physical blow. Even after 20 years, it still had the power to knock the wind from his lungs. I didn't say it did, Charlie said, though they both knew he was lying. Charlie, Wilson said, his voice gentler now, you need to let this go. For your sake. For Sarah's. Charlie tore his gaze away from the creature. I'll let it go when I find out what happened to my son. The bar was nearly empty when Charlie pushed through the door that evening. The rusty anchor was a dive by any definition, scarred wooden tables, a pool table with a rip in the felt, and a perpetual haze of cigarette smoke despite the state's indoor smoking ban. But it was Charlie's dive, a place where he could exist without explanation or judgment. The usual? Asked the bartender, a bearish man named Lou with tattoos crawling up his neck. Charlie nodded, sliding onto a stool. The whiskey appeared in front of him a moment later, amber and inviting. He was on his second drink when the door opened again, bringing with it a gust of cold air and the sound of the ocean. Charlie didn't look up, not until a body settled onto the stool next to his. Little early, even for you, said a familiar voice. Charlie glanced sideways at Pete Drummond. The fisherman was in his 50s, weathered by salt and sun, his beard streaked with gray. They'd been friends once before Danny disappeared, before Charlie had retreated into his grief and his bottle. Heard you found something interesting this morning, Charlie said. Pete grimaced. If by interesting you mean nightmare fuel, then yeah. He signaled to Lou for a beer. Never seen anything like it in 30 years on the water. Where exactly did you find it? Washed up on the rocks, just below the lighthouse. Caught in some netting. Pete accepted his beer with a nod of thanks. But that's not the weird part. Charlie waited, knowing Pete would continue. The fisherman had always loved an audience. The weird part is that I think I've been seeing something out there for weeks now. Just glimpses. Something moving under the water, following my boat. Pete took a long pull of his beer. Thought I was imagining things. But after seeing that thing this morning, I'm not so sure. Charlie's grip tightened on his glass. What do you mean, following your boat? Just what I said. Like it was watching me. Waiting for something. Pete shook his head. Sounds crazy, I know. No, Charlie said quietly. It doesn't sound crazy at all. Because Charlie had seen something too. A shadow beneath the waves, moving against the current. And suddenly, he was terrified that after 20 years of searching, he might finally be close to an answer he wasn't ready to face. That night, Charlie dreamed of the lighthouse. In his dream, he stood at the top of the spiral staircase, watching as the great lens rotated, casting its beam out into the darkness. But something was wrong with the light. Instead of its usual warm glow, it shone with a sickly greenish hue that reminded him of the strange creature's skin. And the beam wasn't empty. Figures moved within it, distorted and elongated, their features blurred as if seen through water. Charlie tried to look away, but he was frozen in place, forced to watch as the beam swept across the ocean, revealing more and more of the things moving beneath the surface. Then, suddenly, one of the figures turned toward him. Through the distortion, Charlie recognized the face. Older than it should be, changed in terrible ways, but still unmistakable. Danny! Charlie woke with a gasp, his heart thundering. Beside him, Sarah stirred but didn't wake. The clock on the nightstand read 3:17 a.m. Sleep was impossible now. Moving quietly, Charlie slipped out of bed and padded to the kitchen. He reached for the bottle in the cabinet, then hesitated. Instead, he grabbed his jacket and keys. The night was cool and clear, the moon casting a silver path across the water as Charlie drove the familiar route to the lighthouse. It had been decommissioned years ago, the keeper's house abandoned to the elements, but the automated light still functioned, sweeping its beam across the water once a minute, every minute. Charlie parked in the gravel lot and made his way to the base of the lighthouse. The door to the tower had been padlocked for years, but Charlie knew another way in, a maintenance entrance that the local teenagers had discovered and kept secret for generations. His own father had shown it to him when he was a boy. The interior of the lighthouse was damp and musty, smelling of salt and rust and decades of neglect. Charlie climbed the spiral staircase slowly, his footsteps echoing in the confined space. Each landing was covered in graffiti, declarations of love, crude drawings, the usual teenage expressions of rebellion. But as he climbed higher, the graffiti changed, becoming something stranger. Symbols he didn't recognize, drawings that made his skin crawl, figures with too many limbs, circular mouths filled with needle teeth. At the top of the lighthouse, the great lens rotated on its base, casting its beam out to sea. Charlie stood transfixed, watching as the light swept across the water below. Once a minute, every minute, just as it had for over 100 years. Except, Charlie realized with a jolt, that wasn't quite right. The interval between rotations was longer than it should be. 65 seconds, maybe 70. A small difference, but to someone who had grown up with the rhythm of the lighthouse in his blood, it was jarring. And the light itself was wrong, slightly greenish, just as it had been in his dream. Charlie moved closer to the lens, examining it. The glass was clean, free of the algae or moss that might have tinted the light. The source of the green glow was the light itself, he realized. Something had been done to the lamp. Charlie reached out, tracing his fingers along the metal housing. It was warm to the touch, vibrating slightly. And then he heard it, a soft, rhythmic sound coming from beneath the floor, a tapping, almost musical in its regularity. Charlie knelt, running his hands along the floor until he found what he was looking for. A trapdoor, hidden beneath years of dust. It was where the keeper would have stored extra oil and wicks in the days before electricity. The trapdoor opened with a protesting creak. Below, darkness yawned. Charlie pulled out his phone, activating the flashlight, and peered down. What he saw made his blood run cold. The storage room had been transformed. The walls were covered in the same strange symbols he'd seen on the staircase, but here they were more elaborate, forming complex patterns that seemed to shift and move in the beam of his flashlight. In the center of the room, a circular pool had been cut into the stone floor, filled with seawater that glowed with the same greenish light as the lamp above. And floating in the pool were dozens of the creatures, smaller versions of the one Doc Wilson had examined, their tentacle-like limbs writhing slowly in the glowing water. Charlie recoiled, nearly dropping his phone. This was impossible. Someone had carved a pool into solid stone, filled it with these things, all without anyone noticing. The lighthouse was abandoned. Yes, but people still came here. Teenagers looking for a place to drink, tourists sneaking past the chain-link fence for a better view of the ocean. Unless they'd been coming here for years. Unless this had been happening right under the town's nose all along. The tapping sound came again, louder now. Charlie realized it was coming from the pool. The creatures were communicating. And suddenly, Charlie knew with bone-deep certainty that he needed to leave, needed to get as far away from this place as possible. He scrambled to his feet, slamming the trapdoor shut. But as he turned to flee, he found he wasn't alone. A figure stood between him and the staircase, silhouetted against the rotating beam. For a moment, Charlie couldn't process what he was seeing. The shape was human, but distorted, elongated in ways that defied anatomy. Then the light swept across them, and Charlie saw the face. "Danny?" he whispered, his voice breaking. It wasn't Danny, not completely. The basic features were there, but changed, warped. The eyes were too large, too dark, reflecting the greenish light like a cat's. The mouth was wider than it should be, stretching almost from ear to ear. "Hello, Dad," said the thing that had once been his son, its voice a wet, gurgling sound. Charlie's legs gave out. He sank to his knees, staring up at the nightmare in front of him. What happened to you?" "I found something," Danny said, moving closer. His movements were wrong, too fluid, as if his joints weren't where they should be. "Or maybe it found me. I was playing near the rocks that day, and I saw something in the water. Something beautiful. We looked for you," Charlie choked out. "For years. I know. I saw you sometimes, searching, but I couldn't come back. Not until I was ready." Danny's hand, too long, the fingers webbed between, reached out, almost touching Charlie's face before pulling back. Not until we were ready. We, Charlie repeated, a chill creeping up his spine. The ones in the deep, Danny said, gesturing toward the trapdoor. They've been here for so long, Dad. Waiting. The lighthouse was built to keep them away. Did you know that? To warn ships. But then they found a way to change the light, to make it call to them instead. Charlie shook his head, unable to process what he was hearing. This isn't real. I'm dreaming. You're not dreaming, Danny said, his voice almost gentle. But you have been blind. Everyone has. The things you want to see, the things you don't. It's all about the light, Dad. What it illuminates, what it hides. What do they want? Charlie asked, finding his voice again. To come home, Danny said simply. This was their world first, you know, before humans, before anything. They were here, in the deep places, and now they want to return. And you're helping them? Danny's too wide mouth stretched in what might have been a smile. I'm one of them now. I've seen what's beneath the surface, Dad. It's beautiful down there, peaceful. No pain, no fear. Just belonging. Charlie thought of Sarah waiting at home, of the town below, unaware of what was gestating in the lighthouse, of 20 years of searching, of grief, of whiskey-soaked nights staring at the beam cutting through the darkness. I can't let this happen, he said, rising to his feet. Whatever you are, whatever you've become, this has to stop. Danny's expression hardened. It's too late, Dad. It's already begun. The light has been calling them for months now. Tonight is just the beginning. As if on cue, the lighthouse beam flashed green, brighter than before. Outside, Charlie heard something. A sound like the ocean itself was drawing a breath. They're coming, Danny said, his voice rising with excitement. Can you feel it? The tide is turning. Charlie lunged forward, trying to push past his son, or the thing wearing his son's face. But Danny moved with inhuman speed, catching him by the throat. Danny's grip was shockingly strong, lifting Charlie off his feet. I wanted you to understand, Danny said, his voice sorrowful now. I wanted you to join us, but I see now that was a mistake. Charlie struggled, clawing at the hand around his throat. His vision began to darken at the edges. I'm sorry, Dad, Danny said, and for a moment, Charlie thought he saw a flicker of his real son in those two large eyes. But the deep is calling, and we must answer. With a strength that no human should possess, Danny hurled Charlie across the room. Charlie crashed into the lens assembly, the impact sending shards of glass and metal flying. Pain lanced through him as he collapsed to the floor, blood warm against his skin. The lighthouse beam stuttered, then went dark. For a moment, perfect blackness enveloped them. Then, slowly, a new light began to fill the room. The greenish glow from the pool beneath the trapdoor, growing brighter by the second. Charlie could hear the creatures below, their tapping more frantic now. What have you done? Danny hissed, rushing to the lens. The light has to guide them in. Charlie struggled to his feet, ignoring the pain radiating through his body. No, he gasped. The light was always meant to keep them away. Danny turned to him, his face contorted with fury. You don't understand what you've done. I understand enough, Charlie said. I understand that my son is gone. Whatever you are, you're not him. Dad, Danny began, but his words were drowned out by a new sound. A deep, resonant call from somewhere out in the ocean, like the song of a whale but distorted, wrong. Danny's head snapped toward the sound, his expression changing to one of rapture. They're here, he whispered. The greenish light from below flared, flooding the room. Charlie shielded his eyes, but not before he caught a glimpse of what was rising from the pool. Not the small creatures he had seen before, but something larger, its many limbs unfurling like the petals of some nightmarish flower. Danny moved toward it, arms outstretched in welcome. It's time, he said, voice thick with emotion. The wait is finally over. Charlie knew he should run, should warn the town, but he couldn't leave. Not yet. Not while some part of his son might still exist within the thing Danny had become. Danny, he called out, desperation making his voice crack. "Whatever they promised you, whatever they've done to you, we can fix it. We can find a way." Danny paused, glancing back over his shoulder. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe even regret. "It's too late for me, Dad," he said softly. "It's been too late for 20 years. Before Charlie could respond, the creature in the pool surged upward, its tentacles wrapping around Danny's body. Danny didn't struggle. Instead, he seemed to welcome the embrace, his body relaxing as he was pulled down toward the glowing water. "No!" Charlie shouted, lunging forward. He grabbed Danny's arm, trying to pull him back. "I'm not losing you again." Danny looked at him one last time. "You never found me, Dad," he said. "But they did." Then he was gone, pulled into the pool in a flash of greenish light. The water churned violently, then stilled, the glow fading to nothing. Charlie fell to his knees beside the now darkened pool, his hands plunging into the cold water. There was nothing there, no creatures, no Danny, just empty darkness. Outside, the strange call sounded again, closer now. Charlie dragged himself to the window, peering out at the ocean below. What he saw made his heart stop. Lights, hundreds, maybe thousands of them, glowed beneath the surface of the water, moving in complex patterns. As Charlie watched, some began to rise, breaking the surface. They weren't lights at all, he realized with mounting horror. They were eyes, glowing eyes attached to bodies like the one Pete had found, but larger, much larger. And they were heading toward the shore. Sarah was waiting when Charlie stumbled through the front door, her face pale with worry. "Where have you been?" she demanded. "It's almost dawn." Charlie couldn't speak, couldn't find the words to explain what he had seen. How could he tell her that their son was gone, truly gone, transformed into something inhuman? How could he explain the army rising from the depths? "Charlie!" Sarah stepped closer, her expression changing to one of alarm as she took in his bloodied, disheveled state. "What happened?" "We need to leave," Charlie managed, his voice hoarse. "Now, get your things." "Leave? What are you talking about?" "Charlie, you're scaring me." "There's no time to explain," he said, already moving toward the bedroom. "Just trust me. We need to go." Sarah followed him, watching as he began throwing clothes into a suitcase. "This is about Danny, isn't it?" she asked quietly. "Charlie, please, talk to me." Charlie paused, looking at his wife. The woman who had stayed with him through 20 years of grief and obsession, who had watched him disappear into a bottle night after night, who had never given up on him despite everything. She deserved the truth. "I saw him," Charlie said, the words catching in his throat. "At the lighthouse. Danny." Sarah's face crumpled. "Oh, Charlie, not this again." "It's not like before," Charlie insisted. "This was real. He was there, but changed. Something happened to him, Sarah. Something terrible." "Charlie, please," Sarah said, reaching for his hand. "I've supported you through everything, but this has to stop. Danny is gone. He's been gone for 20 years. "He's not gone," Charlie said. "He's changed, and he's not alone." Before Sarah could respond, the house trembled, a low vibration running through the floorboards. Outside, a car alarm began to wail. "What was that?" Sarah asked, moving to the window. Charlie caught her arm. "Don't look," he said. "Just trust me. We need to go." But it was too late. Sarah had already seen what was coming up from the beach, dark shapes moving with unnatural speed, their outlines shifting and changing as they approached the town. "Oh my God," she whispered. "What are they?" "I don't know," Charlie said, though it was a lie. He knew exactly what they were, the vanguard of something ancient and terrible, something that had been waiting in the deep for centuries, called forth by the corrupted light, and led by the thing that had once been their son. The house shook again, harder this time. In the distance, Charlie could hear screams, the sound of breaking glass, a car engine revving and then suddenly cutting off. "We need to go," he repeated. "Now." Sarah turned to him, her eyes wide with fear but also with a resolve he hadn't seen in years. No, she said. Not yet. Not without answers. Sarah, if what you're saying is true, she cut him off. If Danny is somehow involved in whatever this is, then I need to see for myself. I need to know. Charlie knew that expression. It was the same one she'd worn 20 years ago, when the search parties had wanted to give up, when the police had suggested Danny might have been taken by the tide. Sarah Harker didn't give up, not when it came to her son. Okay, Charlie said finally, but we stay together. Promise me. Sarah nodded, her hand finding his. Promise. Together, they made their way outside. The street was chaos. People running, cars attempting to flee, windows shattering as the dark shapes moved from house to house. And above it all, the lighthouse stood dark and silent, no longer casting its beam across the water. Charlie and Sarah moved against the tide of fleeing townspeople, heading toward the beach. The closer they got, the worse the destruction became. Entire buildings had been reduced to rubble, cars overturned, the street itself torn up as if by giant claws. And then they saw them, the creatures from the deep, larger now than what Charlie had seen in the pool, their bodies glistening wetly in the early morning light. Some moved on multiple legs, while others slithered like enormous snakes. All of them had the same circular mouths filled with needle teeth, the same two human hands at the end of their tentacle-like limbs. This isn't possible, Sarah whispered, her grip on Charlie's hand painfully tight. This can't be real. But it was real, all too real. And somewhere among these nightmarish beings was what remained of their son. As if summoned by the thought, a figure emerged from the chaos, Danny, or what had been Danny, moving with that same unnatural fluidity. His skin had changed further, taking on the mottled gray-green hue of the creatures, his eyes glowing with the same green light that had filled the pool. Mom, he said, his voice that same wet, gurgling sound. You came. Sarah made a sound. Not quite a scream, not quite a sob, and took a step forward. Charlie held her back. That's not Danny, he said, though the words tore at his heart. Not anymore. But it is, Danny said, moving closer. I'm still me, Mom. Just more. Sarah was trembling, tears streaming down her face. What happened to you? She asked. Where have you been all these years? Learning, Danny said. Growing. Becoming. He gestured to the creatures moving through the town. They've been waiting so long, Mom. Centuries. Cut off from the surface world. Trapped in the deep. But now they're free. And they're going to make everything better. Better. Charlie repeated incredulously. Look around you. They're destroying everything. Not destroying, Danny corrected. Transforming. The old world has to end for the new one to begin. A new sound rose above the chaos. A deep, resonant call. The same one Charlie had heard from the ocean. The creatures responded immediately, their movements becoming more coordinated, more purposeful. What is that? Sarah asked, her voice barely audible. The mother, Danny said, his expression almost reverent. She's calling us home. Charlie looked out toward the ocean. The water was churning violently, waves crashing against the shore with unnatural force. And rising from the depths, a massive shape was emerging. Something so vast that Charlie's mind struggled to comprehend it. A writhing mass of tentacles and eyes and mouths. God help us, Charlie whispered. God has nothing to do with this, Danny said. The mother was here long before any God, and she will be here long after. He turned to Sarah, extending his hand. Come with me, Mom. Both of you. Be part of the new world. Sarah stared at her son's transformed hand, then at his face, still recognizable beneath the changes, still the boy she had lost 20 years ago. Sarah, Charlie warned. Don't. But Sarah was already moving forward, reaching for Danny's hand. I lost you once, she said, her voice breaking. I won't lose you again. Sarah, no. Charlie lunged forward, but it was too late. Sarah's hand closed around Danny's, and immediately, a change began to sweep over her. Her skin taking on a greenish tint, her eyes widening, her fingers elongating. It doesn't hurt, she said, sounding surprised. It feels right? Charlie watched in horror as his wife transformed before his eyes, becoming something no longer human. Something like Danny, like the creatures from the deep. "Your turn, Dad," Danny said, extending his other hand. "Be with us. Be a family again." For a moment, just a moment, Charlie was tempted to be with Sarah and Danny again, to end 20 years of grief and searching, to belong. But then he thought of the town being destroyed, of the massive thing rising from the ocean, of the green light that had corrupted the lighthouse beam. "No," he said, taking a step back. "This isn't right. This isn't natural. Nature is whatever survives," Danny said, his voice colder now. "And we will survive, Dad. We will thrive, with or without you." Sarah was fully transformed now, her body elongated, her skin glistening with the same mucus-like substance that covered the creatures. She looked at Charlie with eyes that were no longer human, reaching for him with webbed fingers. "It's beautiful, Charlie," she said, her voice distorted but still recognizably hers. "Join us." Charlie took another step back, then another. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." Then he turned and ran, his heart breaking with every step, leaving behind what remained of his family. Behind him, the call of the mother rose again, a sound of triumph and hunger. The transformation of Black Point of the world had begun. And Charlie Harker, the last lighthouse keeper's son, ran into the wilderness, alone with the knowledge of what was rising from the deep. The beam cut through the fog, a momentary flash of green light before darkness swallowed it again. Once a minute, every minute, calling to the things that had always been waiting beneath the waves, waiting to come home. Radio static. The radio in Frank Whalen's 1994 Buick Century hadn't worked right in years. Sometimes it would blare to life in the middle of the night while the car sat empty in the driveway, scaring his wife half to death. Other times it would cycle through stations on its own while he drove, lingering just long enough on each frequency for a snippet of song or talk before moving on again like a restless ghost. The mechanic in town had looked at it 3 times and found nothing wrong. "Probably just needs replacing," the guy said with an apologetic shrug. "These old models get temperamental." Frank didn't replace it. He was 58 and set in his ways, the kind of man who wore the same brand of plain white undershirt he'd worn since high school and still used a flip phone because it makes calls just fine. Besides, he'd grown accustomed to the radio's quirks over the years, like an old dog with strange habits you learn to live with. That was before the incident at Miller's Crossing, before what happened to Ellie, before the voices started coming through. Millfield, Maine was the kind of small town that didn't make it onto most maps. Surrounded by dense pine forests with a population that hovered around 1,200 souls. It was the place where Frank had been born, raised, and expected to die someday. He worked maintenance at the local high school, the same one he'd graduated from 40 years earlier. His wife, Margaret, was the town librarian. Their daughter, Ellie, had fled to Boston for college and never really came back except for holidays and the occasional weekend visit. "There's nothing here, Dad," she'd told him once. "Nothing changes. Nothing happens." Frank had always considered that one of Millfield's virtues, until that Tuesday in late October when everything changed. The day had started normal enough. Frank woke at 5:30 a.m., same as always, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table while Margaret slept upstairs. Outside, a heavy fog had rolled in overnight, thick enough that he could barely see the maple tree in their front yard. His phone buzzed. A text from Ellie. "Coming home this weekend. Need to talk. Important." Frank frowned. It wasn't like Ellie to be cryptic, nor was it like her to come home without at least 2 weeks' notice. She was organized, meticulous even. Margaret said she got that from him. He texted back. "Everything okay?" 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, "Yes. Just need to see you and Mom. Talk in person." Frank stared at the message for a long moment. Something felt off, but he couldn't put his finger on what. "Drive safe," he wrote back. "Let us know when you're on the way." He finished his coffee, kissed Margaret goodbye, and headed out to the Buick. The fog had, if anything, grown thicker, wrapping the world in gray cotton. He started the engine, and the radio immediately switched on, not unusual, but instead of music or morning talk, there was only static. He reached to turn it off but paused when he thought he heard something beneath the white noise. A whisper, maybe. He leaned closer. "Coming through." Frank jerked back. The voice had been clear for just that moment. A man's voice, low and urgent, before dissolving back into static. He turned the dial, trying to find the station again, but there was nothing, just hissing emptiness. Must have been his imagination. He switched the radio off and backed out of the driveway. Miller's Crossing sat 5 miles outside town, where County Road 17 passed over the Millfield River. The old covered bridge had been there since before Frank was born, its red paint perpetually peeling no matter how recently it had been touched up. Kids used to dare each other to stand in the middle of it at midnight, something about a woman who drowned herself there back in the 40s. Frank had never put stock in ghost stories. The fog was densest by the river, swirling through the bridge's entrance like smoke. Frank slowed the Buick as he approached. Through the windshield, the covered bridge looked like the mouth of some massive creature, waiting to swallow him whole. The radio clicked on. "Don't go in, don't go in, don't." This time, Frank was sure he'd heard it. A woman's voice, desperate and afraid. His hand shot out and twisted the volume knob all the way down. But the voice continued, no quieter than before. "She's waiting, she's there, she's." Frank's heart hammered in his chest. He stopped the car just short of the bridge entrance. With shaking fingers, he tried turning the radio off completely. The voice cut out mid-sentence, leaving only the purr of the engine and his own ragged breathing. "Christ," he muttered, running a hand over his face. He looked at the bridge again. Through the fog, he could make out the other end, sunlight just barely visible. This was ridiculous. He'd driven across Miller's Crossing thousands of times. He was going to be late for work. Frank pressed the gas and the Buick rolled forward into the covered darkness. Halfway across, the engine died. Frank turned the key in the ignition. Nothing happened, no click, no whir, nothing to suggest the car was even receiving the signal to start. The digital clock on the dashboard had gone dark. His cell phone, when he pulled it from his pocket, showed no signal. Outside the car windows, the fog had crept into the bridge, filling the enclosed space with a thick, soupy whiteness. Frank couldn't see the walls, though he knew they couldn't be more than 10 feet away on either side. He couldn't see the entrance he'd just driven through, nor the exit ahead. The silence was absolute. No birds, no rush of water from the river below. Not even the sound of his own breath seemed to carry in the dense air. Then the radio came to life again. "Frank." A voice, was it the same woman? It was hard to tell through the distortion. "Frank Whalen." Cold sweat broke out along his spine. He hadn't imagined his name. The radio was talking to him. "Who's there?" he called out, feeling immediately foolish. He was talking to his car stereo. Static hissed for several seconds. Then, "She's coming home, Frank. You can't let her." His mouth went dry. "Ellie? What about Ellie?" More static, longer this time. Frank leaned forward, straining to hear anything in the white noise. There, voices, multiple ones, speaking over each other, too distant to make out words but growing gradually louder, like a crowd approaching from far away. Suddenly, they stopped. The static cleared. "She's not Ellie anymore." The voice was different now. A child's voice, high and clear and terribly sad. The radio went silent. At the same moment, the fog outside the car began to recede, pulling back like a tide going out, revealing the wooden walls of the covered bridge. Sunlight streamed through the exit ahead. The Buick's engine turned over without Frank touching the key. The car rolled forward on its own, picking up speed. Frank grabbed the wheel, his knuckles white, guiding it through the remainder of the bridge and out into the morning light. As soon as the tires hit the asphalt on the other side, everything returned to normal. The digital clock blinked back to life. 6:47 a.m. His phone buzzed with an incoming text from Margaret, asking him to pick up milk on the way home. Frank pulled over onto the shoulder and sat there, trembling, for a long time. He didn't tell Margaret about what happened at the bridge. What would he say? The car radio tried to warn me about our daughter? She'd think he was having some kind of breakdown. Maybe he was. But as the week wore on, Frank couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Ellie sent a few more texts. She'd be arriving Saturday afternoon, around 3. She was looking forward to seeing them. Nothing unusual, and yet, every night that week, Frank woke at 3:17 a.m. exactly, heart racing, convinced someone was standing at the foot of the bed. Every night, there was no one there. Every night, he could hear the radio in the Buick turning on and off in the driveway, though when he looked out the window, he could see no lights in the car. Friday night, he dreamed of Miller's Crossing. In the dream, he was walking through the covered bridge, not driving. The fog was there, thicker than ever, and somewhere ahead, a woman was weeping. He followed the sound, unable to see more than a few feet in any direction. "Hello?" he called out. "Who's there? Do you need help?" The weeping stopped. There was a long silence, then a voice whispered right in his ear. "She's going to take your face, Frank." He woke with a strangled cry. Margaret stirred beside him but didn't wake. The digital clock on the nightstand read 3:17 a.m. From outside came the sound of static. Saturday dawned bright and cold, the kind of crisp fall day that normally would have lifted Frank's spirits. Margaret hummed as she cleaned the house, excited to see their daughter. Frank tried to focus on the Sunday crossword, but the words swam before his eyes. "I'm going to run to the store," he told her around noon. "We're out of Ellie's favorite cereal." Margaret smiled. "Always thinking of her. That's why you're her favorite. I'm her only dad. You know what I mean." He did. The Buick started normally. The radio stayed off. Frank tried to convince himself that what had happened at the bridge had been some kind of waking dream, a stress-induced hallucination. He'd been working too hard lately, not sleeping well. That was all. But as he approached Miller's Crossing, a cold dread settled in his stomach. The day was clear, no fog, no atmospheric reason for concern. Yet he found himself slowing down, reluctant to enter the covered bridge again. This is stupid, he thought. Just a bridge. Just a bridge. He drove through without incident.
No voices, no strange electrical failures.
On the other side, he let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The local grocery store was nearly empty, just Mrs. Patterson from down the street and Old Man Garvey getting his lottery tickets. Frank grabbed the cereal, Honey Nut Cheerios, Ellie's favorite since she was 5, and was heading to the checkout when his phone rang. A known number. "Hello!" Static greeted him, then a familiar voice, distorted but recognizable. "Dad!" Frank stopped walking. "Ellie, Dad, don't..." More static interrupted her. "Not me, don't let..." "Ellie? I can't hear you. Where are you?" "Crossing, she's at the..." The line went dead. Frank stood frozen in the cereal aisle, phone still pressed to his ear. Had that really been Ellie? The voice had sounded like her, but strained, frightened. And what had she said? Something about a crossing? Miller's Crossing? He dialed her number with shaking fingers. It went straight to voicemail. He left the cereal behind and rushed back to his car. Margaret wasn't answering her phone either. Frank tried 3 times on the drive home, his panic mounting with each unanswered ring. He was being irrational, he knew that. Ellie was fine. Margaret was fine. Everyone was fine. Except he couldn't get the voice from the radio out of his head. She's not Ellie anymore. He took the turn onto his street too fast, tires squealing. As his house came into view, he saw a car he didn't recognize parked in the driveway. A small red Honda with Massachusetts plates. Ellie's car. She was early. Frank pulled up behind the Honda and practically fell out of the Buick in his hurry. He ran to the front door, fumbling with his keys before remembering it would be unlocked with Margaret home. The house was quiet when he entered. Too quiet. "Margaret?" he called out. "Ellie?" No response. He moved through the first floor, living room, dining room, kitchen. Empty. A pot of coffee sat on the counter, still warm. 2 mugs beside it, both used. "Margaret?" he called again, heading for the stairs. The sound stopped him. A soft, rhythmic squeaking coming from above. It took him a moment to place it. The old rocking chair in Ellie's bedroom, the one Margaret had used to rock her to sleep as a baby. No one had sat in that chair for years. Frank climbed the stairs slowly, dread building with each step. The squeaking continued, steady and unhurried. At the top of the landing, he turned toward his daughter's old room. The door was ajar, revealing a sliver of the room beyond. Someone was sitting in the rocking chair, visible only in silhouette against the window. A woman, long hair falling around her shoulders. Ellie's build. "Ellie?" he said softly, pushing the door open wider. The rocking stopped. The figure turned. It wore Ellie's face, but wrong somehow, the features slightly misaligned, like a mask that didn't quite fit. The smile was too wide, stretching almost to the ears. The eyes were dull, flat, nothing like his daughter's warm brown gaze. "Hello, Daddy," it said in Ellie's voice. "I'm home." Frank took an involuntary step backward. "You're not Ellie." The thing in the chair tilted its head to one side, the movement jerky, unnatural. "Of course I am. Don't you recognize your own daughter?" It stood up, Ellie's body moving with the awkward precision of a marionette. "I've missed you so much. Where's Margaret?" Frank demanded, his voice steadier than he felt. The thing smiled again, that too-wide grin that made Frank's skin crawl. "Mom's taking a nap." It gestured vaguely toward the master bedroom. "She was so excited to see me. She tired herself out." Frank didn't take his eyes off the creature as he backed toward his bedroom. "Stay there," he warned, though he had no idea what he would do if it didn't obey. To his surprise, it sank back into the rocking chair, watching him with patient amusement. It began to rock again, the wood squeaking in steady rhythm. Frank hurried down the hall and pushed open the bedroom door. Margaret lay on their bed, apparently asleep. Her chest rose and fell with even breaths. Relief flooded through him until he noticed something odd. Her face was slack, muscles completely relaxed in a way that didn't look like natural sleep. When he touched her shoulder, she didn't stir. "Margaret!" He shook her gently, then more forcefully. "Maggie, wake up!" Her eyes opened, but there was no recognition in them, no awareness at all. They stared blankly at the ceiling. "What did you do to her?" Frank shouted, whirling around. The thing that wasn't Ellie stood in the doorway, still smiling. "She's fine, just resting. She was so happy to see me, Daddy. Aren't you happy to see me too?" Frank positioned himself between the creature and his wife's prone form. "What are you?" It looked almost hurt by the question. "I told you. I'm Ellie. Your daughter." Took a step into the room. "I crossed back for you." "Crossed back? From where?" "From the other side." Said this as if it were obvious. "Where she sent me." Frank's mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. "Who sent you?" The smile finally faltered, replaced by something darker. "The woman at the bridge. The one who took my face." It touched its cheek, fingers pressing into the skin as if testing its authenticity. "But I got a new one, and now I'm home. She's gonna take your face, Frank." The voice from his dream echoed in his memory. Suddenly, horribly, he understood. "You're not my daughter," he said, voice shaking. "My daughter is still out there somewhere." The thing's expression twisted into something feral. "No, I am Ellie. I am." Its voice distorted, deepening, no longer sounding anything like his daughter. "And you will love me like you loved her." It lunged forward. Frank dove out of the way, scrambling past it into the hallway. He slammed the bedroom door shut and braced himself against it, mind racing. He needed to get Margaret out of there, needed to find the real Ellie. From inside the room came not the sound of pounding or shouting, but laughter, low, gurgling laughter that no human throat could produce. "You can't keep me away, Daddy," the voice crooned, closer to the door now. "I'll take your face next, then Mom's. Then we'll be a family again." Something heavy hit the door from the other side, making it shudder in its frame. Frank knew he couldn't hold it for long. The radio in the Buick. It had tried to warn him. Maybe it could help him now. Another impact against the door, harder this time. Frank felt the wood begin to splinter. He ran. The Buick's keys were still in his pocket. Frank burst out the front door and sprinted to the car, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind him, he heard the thing screaming his name in that horrible, distorted voice, no longer bothering to sound like Ellie. He threw himself into the driver's seat and jammed the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life, and so did the radio, immediate static, no need to turn it on. "Help me!" Frank shouted at the dashboard. "My wife, my daughter, please!" The static wavered, voices struggling to break through. From the corner of his eye, Frank saw the front door of his house slam open. The thing wearing his daughter's face stood there, its features rippling like water, the false Ellie mask slipping to reveal glimpses of something dark and shapeless underneath. "Miller's Crossing," a voice said through the static. The child's voice from before. "Bring it to Miller's Crossing." Frank threw the car into reverse just as the creature leaped from the porch, covering an impossible distance. It slammed into the hood of the Buick, fingers, now elongated into wicked black claws, scrabbling at the windshield. "Daddy!" It screamed, face pressed against the glass, features melting and reforming. "Don't leave me!" Frank floored the gas pedal. The Buick shot backward, tires screeching. The thing clung to the hood for a moment before the momentum threw it off. It landed in a crumpled heap on the driveway, but almost immediately began to unfold itself, limbs bending in ways no human body could move. Frank didn't wait to see more. He threw the car into drive and sped away, tires leaving rubber on the asphalt. In the rearview mirror, he saw the thing standing in the middle of the street, watching him go. Then it turned and walked with deliberate slowness back toward the house, back toward Margaret. The radio kept speaking as Frank raced toward Miller's Crossing, voices fading in and out through the static like distant transmissions. "The woman at the bridge. Been taking people for years. Needs a host to cross over. Your daughter tried to stop her." Frank's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "Is Ellie alive?" he demanded. "Where is she?" "Between." The child's voice answered simply. "Trapped." The woman took her face. Frank thought of the text messages, of the phone call in the grocery store. Had that been the real Ellie, somehow reaching out to him, warning him? "How do I save her?" he asked, desperation cracking his voice. "How do I save my wife?" Static hissed for several long seconds. Then, a trade. The covered bridge appeared ahead, its entrance dark despite the afternoon sun. No fog today, but shadows seemed to gather unnaturally around the structure. "What kind of trade?" Frank asked, but the radio had gone silent. He slowed as he approached the bridge, heart hammering in his chest. There was no sign of anyone else around. No cars, no pedestrians, just the empty road and the waiting darkness of Miller's Crossing. The Buick's engine cut out 10 feet from the entrance, just as it had days before. This time, Frank wasn't surprised. He got out of the car and approached the bridge on foot. At the threshold, he stopped. "Hello?" he called into the darkness. "I'm here to make a trade." His voice echoed strangely, bouncing back to him distorted and wrong. For a long moment, there was no response. Then, from deep within the covered bridge, came the sound of footsteps. Slow, measured footsteps drawing nearer. A figure emerged from the shadows, a woman in a white dress, her features blurred and indistinct, as if seen through running water. Behind her floated what looked like dozens of pale, translucent faces, hollow-eyed and silent. Stolen faces. "Frank Whalen," the woman said, her voice the same one he'd heard on the radio. "You've come to trade." He swallowed hard. "Give me back my daughter, and leave my wife alone." The woman drifted closer, her feet not quite touching the ground. "And what do you offer in return, Frank Whalen?" He knew what she wanted. Had known, perhaps, since the first warning on the radio. "Me," he said. "Take me instead." The woman's blurred features seemed to smile. A father's sacrifice. How traditional. She extended a hand toward him, pale fingers elongated and boneless. "Come then, Frank Whalen. Cross over with me." Frank took a deep breath and stepped forward into the bridge's shadow. The world shifted. He stood in a vast gray emptiness, neither light nor dark, warm nor cold. Around him floated countless faces, disembodied and expressionless, like masks waiting to be worn. Among them, he recognized one. Ellie's face, her real face, eyes closed as if sleeping. "Ellie!" he called out, reaching for her. "She can't hear you." The woman in white materialized beside him, her own face still a rippling blur. "Not yet. You promised to release her, to leave my wife alone. Did I?" The woman circled him, her movements fluid and unnatural. "I agreed to a trade, Frank Whalen. Your life for your daughter's return." "Then take it," Frank said, spreading his arms. "Take my face. Take whatever you want. Just let her go." The woman stopped in front of him, her head tilting at an impossible angle. "Oh, I will take your face, Frank. I will wear it when I walk in your world. I will live your life." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "But I never said when I would release your daughter." Cold dread washed over him. That wasn't the deal. There was no deal. Only your assumption. She reached for his face with those impossible fingers. "Now hold still. This will hurt, but not for long." Frank backed away, looking desperately around the void for some escape, some weapon, anything. His gaze fell on the floating faces surrounding them. So many of them, years worth, decades maybe. An idea struck him, terrible, desperate. "Wait," he said. "Before you take my face, tell me how you do it, how you cross over. I want to understand." The woman paused, suspicious but also, he sensed, vain, proud of her power. "The bridge is a thin place," she said after a moment. "A place between worlds. I was trapped on the other side long ago, but I discovered I could reach through, could borrow faces, could step over for a time." Her formless features rippled with what might have been a smile. "But the borrowed faces don't last. They decay. I need new ones constantly. Unless you take someone permanently," Frank guessed. "Someone who crosses willingly." "Yes." She drifted closer again. "Like you." Frank nodded slowly, as if considering. "And all these others?" He gestured to the floating faces. "They're trapped here? Between. Until I have no more use for them." She reached for a nearby face. An elderly man, his expression frozen in terror, and crushed it in her hand. It dissolved into gray mist. "Or until I tire of them." Frank lunged forward, not away from her but toward her, his hands outstretched. Before she could react, his fingers closed around her blurred face, felt cold and slick, like wet clay. "What are you doing?" she shrieked, trying to pull away. "Release me." "No," Frank growled, tightening his grip. "You've taken enough." He didn't know if what he was attempting was possible, didn't know the rules of this place, but he could feel something yielding under his fingers, could sense her panic. "You can't," she cried, her voice distorting. "You're not like me. You don't know how." "I don't need to know how," Frank said through gritted teeth. "I just need you to stop." He pulled hard. The woman's face came away in his hands like a mask, revealing nothing behind it, just empty gray void. She let out an inhuman wail and began to dissolve, her white dress collapsing inward, her form losing cohesion. "No!" she screamed, but her voice was already fading. "No, I've existed for centuries. You can't." And then she was gone, leaving Frank holding nothing but wisps of gray mist. Around him, the floating faces began to glow with a soft light. One by one, they disappeared, not dissolving like the woman's had, but simply fading away, returning to somewhere else. To the world of the living, Frank hoped. Only one remained, Ellie's face, still suspended before him, eyes closed. "Ellie," he whispered, reaching out to touch it gently. "Come back. Please come back." Her eyes opened. She looked at him with recognition, with love. "Dad!" Light engulfed them both. Frank woke in the driver's seat of his Buick, parked at the entrance to Miller's Crossing. The engine was running, the radio silent. According to the dashboard clock, only minutes had passed since he'd arrived. His phone rang. Margaret's number. "Frank!" Her voice was alert, confused. Where are you? I just woke up on our bed and I don't remember falling asleep. Wasn't Ellie supposed to be here soon? Relief washed over him in a dizzying wave. She's on her way, he said, voice shaking. Everything's fine, Maggie. I'll be home in 10 minutes. He hung up and stared at the covered bridge before him. It looked ordinary now, just weathered redwood and shadows. But he knew better. A text message notification appeared on his phone screen. From Ellie's number, just past the town line sign. See you in 20. Love you both. Frank took a deep breath and put the car in drive. As he pulled away from Miller's Crossing, the radio turned on one last time. Through the speakers came not static or whispers, but a simple, clear message in a child's voice. Thank you. Then it clicked off and did not turn on again by itself after that day. Frank drove home to wait for his daughter's arrival, watching the rearview mirror until the covered bridge disappeared from sight. When people in Millfield tell stories about Miller's Crossing these days, they don't mention the woman who drowned herself there in the 40s anymore. Instead, they talk about the strange phenomenon that sometimes occurs when crossing the old covered bridge on foggy days. Your car radio might turn on by itself. You might hear voices in the static, but they're not trying to frighten you. The locals will assure you with knowing smiles. They're watching out for you, protecting you. Frank Whalen could tell you more about it if you asked, but he never does. He just smiles that distant smile of his and changes the subject. And if you happen to drive past the Whalen house on a quiet night, you might notice his old Buick parked in the driveway, its radio glowing faintly even though no one is inside. Frank says it's just a quirk, a mechanical issue not worth fixing. But his daughter, Ellie, who visits more often these days, knows better. She catches her father sometimes, speaking softly to the empty car as if conversing with an old friend. After all, in places like Millfield, Maine, the line between the living and the dead, between this world and whatever lies beyond, has always been thin. Sometimes all it takes to cross over is a voice on the radio, calling you home. The end.